Chapter 1. The inciting incident. A chill wind swept across the manicured lawns of Beaumont Hall as twilight gave way to evening, and within the grand drawing-room a different current of excitement stirred. Candlelight danced across polished mahogany furniture, illuminating faces brimming with anticipation. Lord Edward Beaumont, a distinguished antiquarian known for his exacting taste and extensive collection of medieval relics, had summoned a select company to witness the unveiling of his most extraordinary acquisition, the 10th century Parchment, whose faded script and enigmatic marginal cipher had baffled scholars for decades. Guests gathered in small clusters, their voices hushed. At the center, beneath a crystal dome upon a velvet-draped lectern, lay the whispering Parchment, its brittle surface rippling with secrets. Dr. Florence Langley, celebrated paleographer and Beaumont's invited expert, stood nearest. Her pince-nez perched delicately on her nose. She spoke in a measured whisper about the Parchment's provenance recovered from the ruins of the Abbey of St. Cyr and its tantalizing potential to reveal lost historical truths nearby. Sir Arthur Winslow, a retired diplomat whose service had taken him from the salons of Paris to the courts of Constantinople, nodded appreciatively. His keen eyes swept the room as though evaluating each guest's status and hidden agenda. Colonel Marcus Harrington, a veteran of colonial campaigns, stood apart by the French windows, his posture rigid, one hand clasping a glass of brandy. Miss Vivian Kells, a young poet known for her dramatic readings, fluttered between clusters, her dark curls and vibrant gowns drawing admiring glances from the assembled company. At a velvet-upholstered love seat by the hearth sat Hercule Poirot, his posture immaculate, his charcoal frock coat pristine, and his famous little grey cells already at work. To his left, Captain Arthur Hastings, his devoted friend, and the evening's reluctant chronicler leaned forward, notebook in hand. Hastings's gaze darted from Poirot to the Parchment and back again, eager to record every detail for his memoirs. Lord Beaumont rose, clearing his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he intoned, "thank you for joining me tonight at Beaumont Hall. You are among a privileged few to view this relic before it takes its place in the British Museum. Dr. Langley will now describe its significance." Dr. Langley advanced, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The Parchment bears a Latin invocation, likely a prayer, yet the cipher in the margin suggests an overlay of concealed text. Whoever annotated these margins centuries later intended to whisper a secondary message, perhaps directions to a hidden reliquary or a confession of some forbidden deed. Her voice trembled ever so slightly, betraying both excitement and apprehension. A murmur of speculation rippled through the audience. Sir Arthur adjusted his cufflinks, eyeing the dome. Colonel Harrington took a measured sip of brandy, surveying the garden through the window. Miss Kells clasped her hands, her breath catching as she imagined the Parchment's secret. Poirot leaned toward Hastings in a whisper. "Observe, Hastings, how each guest reacts. Sir Arthur feigns detachment, yet his eyes gleam with curiosity. Colonel Harrington remains tense, perhaps waiting for an opportune moment, and Mademoiselle Kells, she hungers for mystery, as though the Parchment's secret might elevate her poetry to new heights." Hastings scribbled these observations freely. "But why such secrecy?" he murmured. Poirot tapped his mustache thoughtfully. "Because, mon ami, knowledge is power, and hidden knowledge carries its own peril." At that moment, the hush was shattered by a sudden crash. Glass tinkled on marble as the crystal dome shattered into a halo of fragments. The guests recoiled in shock. Stepping back from the lectern, Dr. Langley gave a strangled cry and reached instinctively toward the Parchment. In the glare of lamplight, her hand brushed the edge of the lectern, and then she pitched forward, collapsing with a faint gasp. Chaos erupted. Miss Kells pressed a hand to her mouth. Sir Arthur sprang from his chair, and Colonel Harrington dropped his brandy. glass shattering at his feet. Hastings leaped toward Dr. Langley, but Poirot held him back with a firm hand on his shoulder. "Stand back, Hastings," he ordered softly. "Eyes cold with calculation. Observe first, then act." Hastings obeyed, his heart thundering. The guests formed a protective half-circle, voices choked with concern. "Dr. Langley, are you hurt? Someone fetch water. My God, she's bleeding." Poirot knelt beside Dr. Langley's prone form. The hem of her gown was soaked in a dark stain that spread outward. He carefully lifted her hand, noting the way her fingers curved unnaturally, a single puncture wound. He remarked to nobody in particular, and very precise, most likely a stiletto or a similar slender blade. Hastings knelt opposite Poirot. But who could have done this? The room was full of people, indeed. Poirot agreed, voice calm. But the killer moved swiftly, with purpose. He motioned to the pristine parchment still atop the lectern, despite the cracked dome. "Notice that the parchment remains intact, no cut, no tear." The assault was aimed solely at Dr. Langley, not at the artifact. A trembling footman knelt at Poirot's side. "Shall I fetch a doctor, sir?" Poirot shook his head. "No doctor until we secure the scene. Hastings, request that the doors be locked and the police summoned without delay. No one must leave until this matter is resolved." Hastings hurried away as Poirot turned his attention to the lectern. He surveyed the shards of crystal, then focused on the parchment. The glass had cracked outward, some fragments lying atop the rug, others scattered on the floor. The killer stood within arm's length of this lectern. Poirot muttered, yet managed to deliver a lethal blow before Dr. Langley could react. He rose, brushing imaginary dust from his coat. "Mesdames et messieurs," he called, his voice clear and authoritative. "Until Superintendent Matthews arrives, I must ask that no one approach the scene or touch anything. Your cooperation will expedite the investigation and perhaps spare further tragedy." The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Lady Beaumont, rushed into the room by a breathless maid, gasped at the sight of her friend's motionless form. "Sir." Arthur turned pale beneath his composed exterior. Colonel Harrington's posture stiffened, and Miss Kells bit her lip, eyes brimming. Poirot surveyed each face in turn, his gaze lingering just long enough to register subtle flinches or involuntary twitches. "I shall question each of you in due course," he continued. "For now, please gather in the adjacent drawing room, where refreshments await. No one is at fault for concern, but any attempt to conceal the truth will only hinder justice." As the guests filed out under the watchful eyes of servants, Poirot knelt once more beside Dr. Langley. He gently closed her eyes and studied the wound's angle. Sharp, downward thrust, he observed softly. An intimate strike, delivered with confidence. He glanced at the shattered dome. Our murderer possesses boldness, but also cunning. To destroy the dome and yet leave the secret parchment unspoiled. Hastings returned, breathless. "Superintendent Matthews is on his way, sir. The butler has locked the gates. 'Twas been," Poirot replied, standing. He dusted imaginary crumbs from his gloves. "Now, Hastings, let us examine the traces left behind before they vanish into the night." He swept a decisive glance toward the window, where a single set of footprints led into the hedges beyond. And so, under the lantern glow and the vaulted ceilings of Beaumont Hall, Hercule Poirot's investigation began. The inciting incident had drawn blood, and with it, the first threads of a mystery that would test his little grey cells as never before. Chapter 2. The first close lantern-lit corridor outside the drawing-room felt unnaturally silent. As the guests gathered in small clusters, their faces drawn and anxious, servants hovered by the door, awaiting orders. Poirot stood beside the shattered window where the glass dome had once protected the parchment. Hastings knelt by the footprints pressed into the soft earth beyond the threshold, together. They surveyed the scene with practiced eyes. "Observe." Hastings, Poirot began, tapping his cane lightly on the flagstone. "The fragments of crystal lie in a perfect semicircle, shards both inside and out. The killer attacked from within, then stepped through the opening, closing the sash behind him. Yet the latch is firmly in place. Someone relocked it after committing the deed." Hastings frowned as he traced the footprints. "The tracks lead into the yew hedge, but I see no sign of return. Whoever did this fled into darkness, correct?" Poirot replied. "But consider, if our murderer wished to conceal that path, he could have retraced his steps. Instead, he allowed only one set of prints to remain, a bold gesture designed to mislead. Now, let us examine the shards." He knelt among the splinters, picking up a triangular piece of glass and inspecting its beveled edge. Sharp, clear, crystal. The attacker wore no gloves, or at least not when handling the dome. This fragment bears a partial fingerprint. Our superintendent will have that matched soon. "But how could he risk leaving such evidence?" Hastings asked, eyes knowing. "A murderer without caution is a dangerous adversary," Poirot observed, "but not a subtle one. He prefers spectacle to stealth. Now, Hastings, assist me with the glove." They moved to the music alcove, where a single leather glove lay abandoned beneath the grand piano's ornate legs. Poirot retrieved it with a gloved hand and held it up. The rich brown leather was creased over the knuckles. The lining bore a faint monogram. "Ebb." "Lord Beaumont's glove," Poirot said. "He must have removed it earlier this evening. But why did our killer drop this one and not the pair?" Hastings turned the glove over. "Perhaps in haste, sir." "But then why preserve the other?" Poirot studied the glove's fingertips. The right thumb is scuffed as if gripping something, a key, a handle. The left hand must have delivered the blow to Dr. Langley. She fell before she could remove it. Yet the murderer pocketed the other glove, and willing to discard evidence of ownership. Hastings nodded. "So our killer carried one glove as a shield and lost the other in the struggle." "Precisely." Poirot replaced the glove on the silver tray. "And what of the matching glove?" "It remains within the circle of suspects' belongings, likely upon Lord Beaumont's person." They paused as Colonel Harrington approached, bearing his stiff composure-like armor. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, "I must ask, do you suspect my involvement? I was by the window when the crash sounded, yet you claim no glass on my boots." Poirot inclined his head politely. "Colonel, I suspect nothing falsely. But if your boots bear no splinter of glass, you were not at the window when it broke. The sole prints we collected behind that bush by the terrace belong neither to you nor to Sir Arthur Winslow, whose steps reach only to the gravel path." The colonel's lips tightened. "I admit I walked out to the terrace briefly to steady my nerves. I did not approach the window." "Then you did so after the sash closed," Poirot suggested. "Our killer, indisposed Dr. Langley, then strolled casually under the moonlight, certain his footprints would fade into shadow. A risky gamble." At that moment, Superintendent Matthews arrived, ushered in by Hastings. The superintendent nodded curtly to the assembled party before advancing to Poirot's side. "I hear you have evidence already collected." "Yes," Poirot said, gesturing to the shards and the diagram Hastings had sketched on a sheet of paper. "Fingerprint on glass, a single glove, and footprints. I trust your men will secure these." Matthews examined the diagram. "We shall send for a chemical camera to reveal any latent marks on the parchment, but human witnesses remain the most telling." "Indeed," Poirot turned back to the guests, who had been summoned into the drawing-room. "Let us begin with those who touched the dome." He beckoned Lady Beaumont forward. "Madam, you lifted the crystal cover to steady it as Dr. Langley approached. Did you feel any unusual vibration or hear voices close by?" Lady Beaumont trembled but steadied herself. "Only Dr. Langley's exclamation. I did not notice anyone else near the lectern." Poirot studied her eyes, and yet the killer must have been within arm's reach. A gentle push, a downward thrust. Dr. Langley never had time to cry out before she collapsed. "I saw no one slip away," Lady Beaumont stammered. "Very well." Poirot nodded. "Then called Sir Arthur Winslow." The retired diplomat rose. With a stiff bow. "Sir Arthur, you lingered near the fire after your conversation with Dr. Langley. You claimed to turn away when you heard the crash." Sir Arthur's composure held. "That is so. I was adjusting my scarf and did not notice the dome smash until guests cried out. And yet," Poirot mused, "your coat-tails are free of glass fragments, and your shoes bear no crystal, yet your footprints are found at the terrace's edge, precisely where you say you walked. But none lead to the window." Sir Arthur's brow furrowed. "I must have turned back at the porcelain vase." "Perhaps," Poirot conceded. "But such precision in timing suggests an awareness of where to tread, an awareness our killer also displayed." Miss Vivian Kell stepped forward next, smoothing her gown. "I was reciting poetry by the piano when it happened," she said. "Dr. Langley offered me a shawl to ward off the chill. So I set it aside on the music rack. Yet that very shawl was found draped partly over Dr. Langley's arm," Poirot noted. "And your voice left no cry of warning." Miss Kells glanced at the floor. I thought it part of my recital and embellishment of my performance. By the time I realized, it was too late." Hastings shifted uncomfortably. Poirot allowed a small smile. "Artistic flair can deceive, mademoiselle, but in the realm of murder, truth is never performed, only extracted." With the principal witnesses accounted for, Poirot gestured to Superintendent Matthews. "Shall we examine the hedge outside?" The night air was crisp. Moonlight sifted through yew branches, illuminating a narrow track of footprints ending at a sunken fountain. Poirot crouched and prodded at the ground. The killer paused here, perhaps to retrieve something, or to take cover. Hastings followed his gaze to the fountain's edge. There, partially hidden by ivy, lay a small object wrapped in a silk handkerchief, the missing gloves pair. Poirot delicately extracted it and unfolded the cloth. "So the pair is complete," he murmured, "and see another fingerprint pattern. Our killer wears gloves on the left hand only." Colonel Harrington stepped forward. Mask of concern. "That glove bears no monogram." "Indeed," Poirot said, "a practical concealment. The killer wanted no link to Lord Beaumont. But by preserving the right glove and discarding the left, he betrayed a singular habit." Hastings watched Poirot replace the glove in evidence. "But what habit, Poirot?" The detective folded his arms. A desire for control. He decided which evidence to leave. It was his choice alone. "Now, Hastings, we have only to trace that fingerprint and place its owner at the scene as superintendent." Matthew secured both gloves and the crystal shard. Poirot surveyed the assembled guests, framed by the moonlit hedges. Their faces were pale and wary, each harboring secrets. Yet one among them had made the crucial error, believing that murder and misdirection could outwit Hercule Poirot. He offered Hastings a nod. "Mon ami, the first clues have spoken. Soon their voices will grow louder, and the murderer's mask will slip." Hastings absorbed every word, heart pounding with anticipation. The night was still young, but already the game had begun in earnest. Under the watchful eyes of Beaumont Hall's stone gargoyles, Poirot's investigation pressed forward. each step uncovering the delicate threads of deceit that bound the suspects and one would soon find age. Himself ensnared by the detectives. Little grey cells. Chapter 3. The gathering of suspects by the time the drawing-room clock chimed 10. The immediate crisis had settled into an uneasy calm. Superintendent Matthews paced at one end of the room, reviewing his notes, while Poirot and Hastings occupied high-backed chairs near the hearth. The rest of the guests were arrayed in a loose semicircle, each face marked by tension and curiosity. Poirot rose gracefully and raised a gloved hand. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "we have seen the shards of evidence. But now we must examine the human element, the motives each of you may harbor. I shall ask you to tell me, one by one, what you were doing when, alas, our dear Dr. Langley met her fate." He cast a survey of the room. "Let us begin with Lord Edward Beaumont." Lord Beaumont stood, pale but resolute. "I was in my study," he said, voice trembling slightly, "reviewing some correspondence about the Parchment's possible destination after the museum exhibit. I heard the crash and rushed here. But by then—" He swallowed and glanced at the spot where Dr. Langley had fallen. It was too late. He bowed his head. "I admired Florence's scholarship more than any other. To think anyone among us would harm her." His voice trailed into unsteady silence. Poirot inclined his head empathetically, then turned to Lady Beaumont. She rose, smoothing her skirt with quivering hands. "I was assisting Florence with her shawl," she said, her voice wavering. "The draught was making her cold. I never left her side until the crash. I swear I did not see anyone approaching the lectern." She pressed her gloved fingers together. "She trusted me. And I—" She broke off, tears welling. Hastings offered her a reassuring nod, but Poirot's gaze remained steady and impassive. He simply said, "'Tis been, madam." Then he motioned to Sir Arthur Winslow. The former diplomat gave a slight bow. "My implication in all this pains me deeply," he began. "I was conversing with Florence about her theory that the marginal cipher could reference a papal decree lost in the 16th century. We debated whether it was a confession or a map. She insisted on demonstrating her method tonight. Before the public display." He paused. "When I heard the glass, I turned and saw only broken fragments." He took a breath. "I regret that. I could not prevent this. Your regret is noted," Poirot replied. "And yet regret, while noble, does not absolve one of opportunity." He allowed that to hang in the air, then turned to Colonel Marcus Harrington. The colonel's shoulders were rigid beneath his tunic. "I was refreshing my memory of the estate's layout," he said. "I thought to admire the garden in moonlight helped clear the mind after the excitement. I did not go near the lectern." He met Poirot's gaze squarely. "I have served in many theatres of war. I am not unfamiliar with danger, but I would never harm a guest in my own friend's home." Poirot nodded slowly, and yet courage in war does not always translate to empathy in peace. He glanced at the colonel's boots. They bore no sign of crystal. "Your footprints confirm you did not approach the window until after the sash had been latched." He looked to the assembled company. "You, Colonel, arrived moments before the incident. A brief sojourn among the youths, then a return. Curious behavior, but not yet disqualifying." Miss Vivian Kells rose next, her dark eyes bright with equal parts defiance and distress. "I was rehearsing a poem with Florence by the piano," she said. "She wanted to test the acoustics for a public reading later this week. I set aside her shawl on the music rack. I did not leave her until we heard the crash." Her voice faltered. "She was my friend. I cannot imagine why anyone would want to harm her. Friendship, like ambition, can be a powerful motive," Poirot observed gently. Yet perhaps our colleague Miss Kells can explain why she felt the need to rehearse here rather than in the library or gallery. Miss Kells shook her head. The drawing-room's acoustics are unparalleled, she insisted, and Florence trusted me entirely. Poirot's attention drifted to the butler, Mr. Camden, who stood at the back of the room. He beckoned quietly. And you, Mr. Camden, what did you observe? The butler cleared his throat. I was in the corridor, Monsieur Poirot, attending to Lady Beaumont's request for fresh tea. I heard the crash and hastened here. I saw Miss Kells near the piano and Colonel Harrington at the window. No one else passed my station. He clasped his hands. I regret I cannot be of more assistance. Thank you, Mr. Camden, Poirot said, then turned his gaze to the footman. Miss Davis, and you. The young footman swallowed, voice barely above a whisper. I was placing the china in the sideboard when I heard the noise. I peeped round the corner and saw. I saw Lady Beaumont and Miss Kells, but no one else. Then the superintendent came. He averted his eyes. I could not see well. Poirot gave an encouraging nod. Honesty is always the best policy. My friend. He returned to the center of the room and addressed the group once more. We have heard each account. But I note two inconsistencies. Yes, he let his voice drop, slightly, drawing their attention. First, the sash was latched from inside, yet the killer fled through it. Second, the glove belonging to Lord Beaumont was left behind, while the mate was found hidden by the fountain. Either our culprit failed to anticipate our search, or they wished us to think so. A murmur went through the guests. Poirot raised his hand for silence. I shall now ask each of you to remain here while I consult with Superintendent Matthews. In the meantime, Hastings, please arrange for a tea, to be served in the library, and request that no one touch anything. He turned back to the suspects. Do not leave this room. Your cooperation may spare further distress, as the butler began to move toward the library. Hastings gave a curt nod to Superintendent Matthews, who led Poirot aside. The detectives' keen eyes flickered with thought. Mon ami, Poirot whispered, we have the suspects rated each with motive, opportunity, and yet each with a flaw in their story. He tapped his temple. Our next step, to analyze the psychological underpinnings of these statements, pay attention to hesitation, choice of words, and where the eyes roam when guilt stirs within. Hastings nodded, and perhaps compare their demeanors before and after the crime. Exactment. Poirot smiled thinly. But for now, we proceed to the interviews one at a time. Away from prying ears, only then will the truth begin to crystallize. He straightened his coat and squared his shoulders. Come, Superintendent let. You see who will break first. Under the watchful portrait of Beaumont Hall's founding lord, the suspects settled into an uneasy hush. The drawing-room's grand windows framed the inky night. And somewhere beyond the hedges, the wind whispered of hidden secrets yet to surface. The gathering of suspects was complete, and from this close circle, the killer would be unmasked. Chapter 4. Poirot rails following morning. Beaumont Hall wore its morning calm like a thin veil over the night's turmoil. Silver light filtered through misted windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced above the polished floorboards. In the great hall, Poirot stood by the hearth, adjusting his immaculate cravat. Superintendent Matthews hovered nearby, clutching his notebook, while Hastings consulted with Mr. Camden on the day's arrangements. Mon ami, Poirot said softly to Hastings, today we advance from mere observation to formal inquiry. Each suspect will join us in turn alone, in the library, so that no whisper among them can cloud our judgment. Hastings nodded. Which order shall we follow, sir? Poirot tapped his cane thoughtfully. We begin with Lord Beaumont. the proprietor and prime interlocutor. His attachments to the Parchment are both emotional and professional. Let us gauge how he stands when the weight of investigation rests solely upon his shoulders. Moments later, Lord Beaumont entered the oak-panelled library, closing the door behind him. The room smelled of leather-bound tomes and fresh tea. A single armchair awaited him beside her. Small writing desk. Poirot and Hastings seated themselves across the room, their posture inviting confidence. Lord Beaumont. Poirot began in his soft French lilt. "You received Dr. Langley's final report only yesterday. What did it promise?" Beaumont drew a slow breath. "Monsieur Poirot, her preliminary decryption was astounding. She believed the cipher revealed a hitherto unknown dedication by a medieval abbot possibly confessing to heresy. It could alter our understanding of ecclesiastical history. And did you discuss this with anyone else before tonight's gathering?" Beaumont hesitated. "With my wife and Dr. Langley alone." "No one else?" Poirot inclined his head, his eyes searching. "Yet you confided in 3 guests privately, Sir Arthur. Colonel Harrington and Miss Kells. Each now professes admiration for the scholarship, yet none knew your full intent. Why share only fragments?" Beaumont's expression clouded. "I wished to test their reactions. A scholar's curiosity can be dangerous. I needed to know whom I could trust with this knowledge." "Trust?" Poirot repeated. "A fragile thing. You say you rushed here when the crash sounded. Yet your glove was found at the piano stool far from the lectern. Why, my glove?" Beaumont faltered. I removed it to steady Dr. Langley as she examined the parchment. The dome shattered. I threw my hand out to break her fall only to see her collapse." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And yet the glove you removed bears no trace of glass, no scratch." "Do you possess a second pair?" Beaumont's brow furrowed. I cannot recall. I may have switched gloves earlier, while handling other artifacts." "Curious," Poirot murmured. "Artifacts handled without proper care can want more than parchment. Thank you. Lord Beaumont, you may go." Beaumont rose, pale and shaken, and left with a curt nod. Hastings let out a low whistle. "He seems genuine, yet his answers contain cracks in the logic, exactament," Poirot replied. "Now, Hastings, we proceed to Lady Beaumont." He glanced at the clock. 10 minutes before the tea tray arrived. Lady Beaumont entered next. Her composure forced, Poirot offered a gentle smile. "Madam, I regret the necessity of these measures, but to uncover the truth, we must peel away appearances." Lady Beaumont sank into the armchair, smoothing a lace skirt. "Of course, monsieur. I will do whatever is required. Thank you. Tell me, when you assisted Dr. Langley with her shawl, did you notice any hesitation in her step, any change in her demeanour?" Lady Beaumont paused. She was eager, almost impatient. She lifted the dome so quickly, I could scarce steady it. She trembled. Though whether from cold or excitement, I could not tell. A trembling hand may reveal fear, Poirot observed. Fear of what? Dr. Langley anticipated something tonight, something more than an academic revelation. Lady Beaumont's eyes widened. "What are you suggesting?" Poirot inclined his head. "Only that the cipher may have contained names someone wished to protect. You, Lady Beaumont, as hostess, would bear the weight of scandal. She swallowed. I had no interest in the Parchment secret. I only wished to share in Edward's enthusiasm. And yet you lifted the dome," Poirot said softly. "Alone. Did anyone urge you to help?" Lady Beaumont thought a moment. "No one. I acted instinctively. Instinct can be sincere." Lady Beaumont exhaled. "I touched nothing else, I swear." Poirot allowed a faint smile. "'Tis been. You may retire, one by one." Poirot guided each suspect into the library. Sir Arthur Winslow, whose polished diplomacy faltered under questioning about his precise whereabouts at the moment of the crash. Colonel Harrington, who bristled at inquiries into his late-night stroll among the yews, and Miss Vivian Kells, whose melodramatic recital failed to conceal the tremor in her voice when asked why she let Dr. Langley approach the lectern unguarded. Each session followed the same ritual, the suspect seated alone under Poirot's calm scrutiny, Hastings positioned to record both spoken words and visible mannerisms, and the detective's little grey cells absorbing every nuance. Outside the library door, whispers hummed among servants, but inside, silence reigned, broken only by the scratch of pen on paper and Poirot's laconic questions by midday. The private interviews concluded, Poirot and Hastings reconvened in the library's sunlit corner, the tray of untouched tea cooling on the desk beside them. "Mon ami," Poirot said, brushing crumbs of thought from his moustache. "We have heard each alibi and each motive, but one detail stands out, the ciphers. Margin contained not only the inverted V, but also a partially erased name. That name belonged to someone present." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "You think the culprit attempted to erase their own identity?" "Mais oui," Poirot smiled. "As desperate scholars erase traces of their plagiarism, so too does a guilty party seek to excise their involvement. Now, we must coax out that faint inscription." He reached into his coat for a small vial, infrared reagent, once applied to the parchment. "It will reveal the hidden letters. But before we disturb that precious relic, I propose a final gathering in the drawing-room at 12 o'clock, where the superintendent and I shall display our findings." Hastings stood, and then, Poirot said, "We draw the circle tighter, for by the end of this day, our killer will know that no secret remains buried." He tapped his temple with a gloved fingertip. "The little grey cells are stirring and they grow hungrier with each clue." Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. A hush fell over the library. Superintendent Matthews and Poirot prepared for the next phase of their inquiry. The afternoon sun slanted through the mullioned windows, casting long rectangles of light across rows of leather-bound volumes. Hastings ranged his notebook on the small writing table, ready to capture every nuance, while the suspects waited in the adjoining foyer, each summoned in turn for a private audience. Poirot turned to Matthews. "Mon ami, we commence with the most outspoken suspect, Miss Vivian Kells. Her dramatic flair may conceal as much as it reveals. Observe her reactions closely." Moments later, Miss Kells entered. Brushing a curl from her forehead, she curtsied with exaggerated grace, then sat in the armchair opposite Poirot. "Miss Kells," Poirot began, his tone gentle yet probing, "you were rehearsing a recitation with Dr. Langley by the piano. Tell me, what did you observe of her behavior before the crash?" Miss Kells clasped her hands. She was eager. Perhaps she insisted on lifting the dome herself. Murmuring something about feeling its aura, she paused, gaze distant. Then, when the glass shattered, she froze as if in shock. I rushed forward, but by then, her voice faltered. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "You claim you rushed to her side. Yet no shards of glass were found on your gown or gloves. Explain this discrepancy." Miss Kell's breath caught. I must have stepped back in fright, away from the shattered dome." She twisted her shawl. "Surely in that haste I avoided the fragments. But your shawl, Dr. Langley's, was found draped over the lectern." Poirot tapped his notebook. "You said you set it on the music rack. How did it transfer, Miss?" Kells bit her lip. "Perhaps in my shock I dropped it and someone else placed it there." She glanced toward the library door. I cannot say." Poirot closed his notebook. "Thank you, Miss Kells. You may go." As she left, her shoulders sagged, and Hastings noted the tension in her jaw. Next was Sir Arthur Winslow, who entered. With measured footsteps, he offered a polite nod before seating himself. Sir Arthur, Poirot began. You conversed with Dr. Langley about the cipher's possible link to a Renaissance annotation. Did she reveal any names or dates that could provoke a drastic reaction? Sir Arthur folded his hands. She spoke of Abbot Ulmoric, accused of heresy in 1294. She believed the parchment contained his confession. It would have scandalized the church, yes, but hardly enough motive for a murder. Poirot arched an eyebrow. A murder need not be logical to the mind of its perpetrator. Sir, tell me, after your discussion, did Dr. Langley appear threatened or fearful? Sir Arthur paused. She was exhilarated, her eyes shone with discovery. No sign of fear. Then why? Poirot pressed. Did the killer target her and not the parchment itself? We might assume a scholar would remove the evidence rather than eliminate the scholar. Sir Arthur's expression flickered. Perhaps the murderer sought to silence her before she published findings. But as you said, monsieur, such logic may not apply. Poirot nodded. Thank you, Sir Arthur. The diplomat rose and gave a curt bow, leaving Hastings to record the slightest tremor in Sir Arthur's composure. Colonel Marcus Harrington entered next, his military bearing unshaken. He saluted, then seated himself with deliberate calm. Colonel, Poirot said, you mentioned walking through the gardens to clear your mind. Did you encounter anyone there? The colonel's gaze was steady. No one. The grounds were deserted. I walked to the yew arch at the east side, paused by the fountain, and then returned. Yet your footprints trace a path only toward the terrace, not the fountain's precise rim, and the matching glove lay concealed beneath ivy near the fountain. Poirot tapped the matching glove's notation. Explain this inconsistency. The colonel's jaw tightened. I saw the glove near the fountain when I paused. I did not pick it up, it lay too close to the bushes. I left it undisturbed. Poirot studied the colonel's face. Why would the murderer hide the glove there, if not to plant confusion? You are accustomed to strategic concealment, are you not? Harrington's lips pressed then. Strategy in war is not the same as deceit among friends. I did not. Poirot raised a gloved finger. A moment, Colonel. Your familiarity with concealment may have inspired the killer's actions. Or the killer may have been you. The Colonel's eyes flashed. He stood abruptly. That accusation is outrageous. Poirot remained impassive. I merely note possibilities. He nodded to Matthews, who ushered the Colonel out. Hastings recorded the Colonel's flush of anger and rapid breathing. Lady Beaumont entered last, composed yet strained. She sat with hands clasped in her lap. Madam, Poirot began. You steadied the dome as Dr. Langley approached. Did she say anything to you that seemed unnerving? Lady Beaumont exhaled slowly. She whispered that the parchment's cipher included the name of someone still living, someone with much to lose. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Did she specify who? Lady Beaumont shook her head. No, she looked at me and said only that I would understand when the time came. Curious. Poirot tapped his cane. You then lifted the dome alone. Who else touched it before the crash? Lady Beaumont's voice trembled. Only Dr. Langley. I did not see anyone else near, and yet the modern ink symbol appeared simultaneously with the murder. Poirot leaned forward. Do you believe that symbol points to you, or someone protecting you? Lady Beaumont's lips quivered. I do not know. I only wish. Her voice broke. I never meant harm to Florence. Poirot closed his notebook. Thank you. Madam, you may go. As Lady Beaumont left, the library door closed with a soft click. Poirot turned to Matthews and Hastings. Our initial interviews confirm what we suspected. He said, smoothing his mustache, Each suspect offers plausible denials. Yet each displays hesitation or contradiction, the glove's concealment, the missing glass fragments, and the whispered warning about a living name all point to a murder driven by personal stakes, not mere academic curiosity. Hastings looked up. "What shall we do next, Poirot?" "Next," Poirot replied, "we return to the drawing room at 2 o'clock as planned. There, we apply the infrared reagent to the parchment. We shall reveal the erased inscription and compel our culprit to reveal himself or herself before." All eyes. Superintendent Matthews nodded. "I'll arrange for the reagent and equipment immediately." Poirot offered a thin smile. "Very good. For now, mon ami, let us allow our suspects a brief respite. They shall suspect nothing until we unveil the hidden truth, and then the game will truly begin." Chapter 6. The first false-led drawing-room glowed under afternoon light as the assembled party reconvened. A low murmur rippled among the guests' speculation, unease, hidden relief. At the far end, a modest table was set, the restored parchment beneath its crystal dome, a small bottle of infrared reagent, and the brass lamp to activate it. Superintendent Matthews stood by, nodding to Hastings, who held a camera and a small hand lens. Poirot, ever composed, remained beside the table, hands clasped behind his back. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot announced in his precise tones, "we now proceed with the unveiling of the erased inscription. I ask you all to observe in respectful silence." He turned to Matthews. "When you are ready, monsieur." Matthews uncorked the reagent and applied a few drops to the parchment's margin. Under the lamp's glow, the faint indentations darkened, revealing a name obscured by age and haste: Harrington. A collective gasp rose among the guests, eyes darted to Colonel Marcus Harrington, whose face had paled the moment the letters emerged. Hastings snapped several photographs as Poirot peered through his monocle. "Indeed," Poirot said calmly, "the erased name points to one of our company. Colonel Harrington. You have been named in the margin. Why?" The colonel rose to his full height, voice controlled but quivering. "Monsieur Poirot, this is absurd. My name could have been placed here by anyone. I have no connection to this parchment beyond casual conversation." Poirot inclined his head. "Perhaps. And yet Dr. Langley believed the margin would reveal names of those who wronged the medieval abbot. Might you share a surname by coincidence? Unlikely." He paused, letting the implication linger. Colonel Harrington's jaw tightened. "I reject the suggestion that I..." Before he could finish, Miss Vivian Kells interjected, voice quivering with indignation. "This is a travesty. The symbol appeared after Dr. Langley was killed. Surely someone sought to frame the colonel." She turned to Sir Arthur Winslow. "I trust you would not allow such a travesty in your own house, sir." Sir Arthur's eyes flicked to Poirot, then back to the colonel. "The evidence is compelling, but hardly conclusive." He brushed his sleeve as though dusting off a stain. "We must be cautious." Poirot held up his hand. "Caution is well placed. Colonel, your footprints led into the hedges, and you admitted to pausing near the fountain, yet your denial of nefarious intent remains. However, an academic act has been performed. Your name erased, then reinscribed with deliberate defacement. Our killer wished to draw suspicion upon you." Harrington's face flushed. "And why would the murderer choose me?" "I have no motive beyond intellectual curiosity. On the contrary," Poirot replied, "you have a deeper link. You and Dr. Langley shared a past acquaintance. You met in Cairo some years ago. Did you not? She was studying at the university there." The colonel's eyes widened. "We met briefly. Yes, but that was years ago. I've said nothing of that tonight. But you reacted sharply when questioned," Hastings pointed out. "A sign of discomfort at the mention of your name." The colonel swallowed. "Yes, I did not wish to disclose that connection not because it was shameful, but because it was trivial. Trivial to you, perhaps, Poirot said, but to a scholar, every detail is significant. He turned to Lieutenant Evans, who had quietly entered with tea trays. You may serve the tea now. Tea was poured and offered round. A momentary respite as the suspects exchanged guarded glances. Colonel Harrington accepted a cup, hands steady, but his jaw remained tight. Miss Kells hovered near the piano, absently tracing a key with her finger. Sir Arthur maintained a studied aloofness, and Lady Beaumont sipped her tea with trembling politeness. Poirot allowed the room to settle before continuing. We have our first false lead Harrington's name on the parchment. But tell me, Colonel, did you see anyone near Dr. Langley's work before she fell? Someone who might have tampered with the margin? Harrington set down his teacup. No. I approached the lectern only after the glass fell. The room was in chaos. If someone erased the name, it must have been a scholar. Poirot nodded slowly. A scholar with more academic stake in the discovery than Colonel Harrington. Someone who feared exposure if the true cipher became public, someone whose reputation might suffer. Sir Arthur cleared his throat. Surely you do not suggest an esteemed diplomat would resort to such measures? Poirot regarded him with polite severity. I suggest only that motive and means must align. A diplomat's prestige can be damaged by scandal, as can a poet's or a host's. Miss Kells bristled. Are we all under suspicion? Then, what about Lady Beaumont, or Sir Arthur, or even you, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot offered her a reassuring smile. Certainly not me. Mademoiselle, I occupy the role of observer, but each of you remains suspect until a motive is either affirmed or refuted. And what of the butler? Mr. Camden, you witnessed much in the corridor. Mr. Camden dipped his head. I saw Miss Kells leave the drawing-room moments before the crash. I thought she simply admired the firelight. Miss Kells's eyes flashed. I did no such thing. I was with Dr. Langley until the crash. Poirot held up a hand. We now have conflicting testimonies. The colonel's name cast on the parchment, the butler's sighting of Miss Kells, the glove found at the fountain, all pointed differing directions. He tapped the table. One of these threads is a false lead, a diversion crafted by the murderer. Hastings leaned forward. But which is false? Poirot. The detective pressed his lips together thoughtfully. At present, all are plausible, yet none suffice. We must wait for a confirmation, perhaps from the fingerprint on the glass shard, or from residue on the matching glove, or further infrared analysis of the parchment. He paused, observing the suspects as they exchanged uneasy glances, until then, I propose we take no further action against Colonel Harrington. He has been publicly vindicated by the undermining of this false lead. But the true culprit, having diverted our attention, now believes himself secure, yet he underestimates the precision of our investigation. He turned to Superintendent Matthews. Please collect the evidence and compare the fingerprints. Meanwhile, moan on me, Hastings, and I shall examine the glove for chemical traces, perhaps ink or blood residue, that will identify the genuine murderer. As Matthews and Hastings departed, Poirot allowed a small smile. Though the first false lead had pulled attention toward the colonel, it had also exposed a scholar's desperation and the murderer's willingness to manipulate evidence. The suspects remained ensnared in doubt, and in that doubt, Poirot's little grey cells found fertile ground. The drawing-room grew silent once more, save for the ticking of a gilt clock outside. A distant church bell tolled the hour. Within, the game of misdirection had been played, and the players were none the wiser. But the true lead would come, and when it did, the web of deception would unravel swiftly. Chapter 7. The Psychological Gambit that afternoon. The atmosphere within Beaumont Hall crackled with an undercurrent of suspicion. in the drawing room. The suspects gathered once more under Superintendent Matthews's watchful eye. The cracked crystal dome still sat to one side, its shattered fragments preserved as evidence. Poirot had requested a subtle change. Instead of overt interrogation, he would employ a more delicate strategy, laying psychological traps to provoke revealing reactions. Hastings observed from a discreet distance as Poirot stood before the assembled party, finger steepled, the detective's small, dark eyes danced with quiet anticipation. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, voice soft yet carrying to every corner, "tonight I wish to explore not the facts of the case, but the emotions that underpin them. Crime, after all, is born of motive, and motive is rarely reasoned in the cold light of logic. It thrives in passion, fear, envy, and pride." He paused, letting each word sink in. Miss Kells shifted, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Sir Arthur's posture stiffened. Colonel Harrington's jaw tightened. Lady Beaumont's gloved hands clenched in her lap. "Let us begin," Poirot continued, with the notion of betrayal. He turned to Sir Arthur Winslow. "Sir Arthur, you delight in diplomacy, finding middle ground, easing tensions. Yet imagine, for a moment, that someone you trusted most had betrayed your confidence. How would you react?" Sir Arthur lifted his chin. "I would be deeply hurt. Monsieur Poirot, trust, once broken, is not easily restored." He paused, gaze flicking toward Colonel Harrington, whose expression darkened. "Indeed," Poirot replied, "and betrayal stings most when cloaked in familiarity. Colonel Harrington," he said, shifting his gaze, "you spoke earlier of your acquaintance with Dr. Langley in Cairo. That suggests a bond of friendship. Yet here you are, under suspicion for a murder. How does that feel to be so mistrusted by those who knew you?" The colonel forced a tight smile. "I feel misunderstood. I had every reason to admire her work." His voice was clipped. Hastings noted the slight tremor in his hand as he raised his teacup. Poirot nodded sympathetically. Admiration a lovely sentiment, but also fertile soil for envy. Dr. Langley's reputation was rising rapidly. Perhaps someone here feared her eclipse their own achievements. A hush fell. Miss Kells's lips pressed together. Lady Beaumont's breath caught. Sir Arthur's eyes narrowed slightly. Poirot then turned to Miss Kells. "Mademoiselle, as a poet, your livelihood rests on your fame and acclaim. If Dr. Langley's discoveries propelled her into the scholarly spotlight, would that not threaten your own standing in certain circles?" Miss Kells's cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "My poetry is my passion," she said softly. I did not think of it as competition." Yet her voice wavered. "Betraying unease, competition," Poirot mused. "An understandable human instinct. But consider this. A competitor who admires her opponent's talents may also harbor resentment that can fester." He let the idea hang in the air, then offered Lady Beaumont his gentle attention. "Madame, you and Dr. Langley shared close proximity tonight, lifting the dome, exchanging glances. That intimacy suggests trust. Yet if Dr. Langley's secret implicated someone dear to you, would you hesitate to intervene? Even by drastic means." Lady Beaumont's breathing caught. She pressed her gloved hands together. "I loved Florence as a sister. Monsieur Poirot, if her discovery endangered my family's reputation, I would have asked her to withhold publication. It never harmed her." Poirot inclined his head. "And yet, sometimes words are insufficient to dissuade. Actions speak louder." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "Now, Lord Beaumont, your rigorous tests of character among us have been instructive. But what if one of your tests turned deadly? Would you feel guilt for having invited this tragedy?" Lord Beaumont swallowed. "I invited scholars to share knowledge. not to sow danger. If my enthusiasm led to her death, I would bear that guilt heavily. Poirot allowed a faint smile. Guilt a powerful force. It can twist conscience, erode resolve. A guilty person may reveal themselves under its weight. He stepped closer to the hearth, where the flicker of firelight illuminated his calm countenance. Tonight. Then, I shall observe not only your words, but your silences. I shall watch how you respond to suspicion, how your heart races at implied betrayal, how your face betrays envy or fear. He pointed a slender finger toward Colonel Harrington. Colonel, if I were to suggest that your past acquaintance with Dr. Langley concealed a deeper involvement, perhaps a quarrel over credit for her work, what would you say? The colonel's hand tightened round his teacup until the porcelain rim creaked. I would say you insult my honor. He snapped, then forced himself to exhale smoothly. But I would welcome any evidence to clear my name. Poirot nodded and then addressed the entire group. I intend to remain among you this evening, engaging each of you in conversation, offering gentle challenges and observing your reactions. Do not mistake my courtesy for weakness. In the realm of psychology, the softest touch can yield the deepest wound. He clasped his hands behind his back. You may continue with your evening refreshments. I shall wander among you posing questions, noting hesitations, listening for the gasp of a guilty conscience. As Poirot glided away, Hastings followed, notebook at the ready. The suspects resumed polite chatter, though their voices were strained. Colonel Harrington avoided others' gazes. Sir Arthur took refuge in measured commentary on the weather. Miss Kells fidgeted with the edge of her gown. Lady Beaumont stared into her teacup. Poirot paused beside the piano, where Miss Kells had placed the shawl. He struck a low chord, then looked up. Mademoiselle, tell me, do you find the sound melancholy or hopeful? Startled, Miss Kells answered, Hopeful, monsieur. A gentle promise of what might come. A promise, Poirot repeated, and promises are broken, sometimes by those we least suspect. He moved on, leaving her with a pale smile and trembling hands. Hastings approached Sir Arthur by the window. What did he intend with that question? Hastings murmured. Sir Arthur exhaled. To unsettle, no doubt. He pries at our emotions: fear, envy, guilt, until someone breaks. Hastings nodded. Which emotion will crack first? Sir Arthur shrugged. That remains to be seen. But be watchful, Hastings. Poirot's game is subtle and the killer may falter yet. As the drawing-room's lamps dimmed and the hour grew late, Poirot circulated among the guests, his soft voice eliciting reactions small but telling. Each glance, each intake of breath, each flicker of the eyelid was recorded in Hastings's notebook. By nightfall, tensions had risen. The psychological game was in full swing, and one suspect, racked by concealed guilt, would soon crack under the detective's elegantly poised inquiries. The little grey cells had set their net, and no one would escape its intricacies. Operate a secondary mist late into the evening. The tension in Beaumont Hall had reached a fever pitch. The guests gathered once more in the drawing-room after Poirot's psychological provocations, sought solace in conversation and light refreshments. Yet, even as they nibbled on petits fours and sipped sherry, an undercurrent of unease thrummed in every hushed exchange. Poirot reclined in a wing-back chair near the fireplace, eyes half closed in thought. Hastings sat at his side, notebook poised. Superintendent Matthews lingered at the door, prepared to enforce order. The crystal dome and parchment lay on a side table, now under lock and key in the adjacent study, while the shattered fragments remained preserved in a glass case. Suddenly, a piercing cry rang out from the corridor. The guests sprang from their seats. Lady Beaumont rushed forward, skirts swirling, followed by Colonel Harrington and Miss Kells. Poirot and Hastings were on their feet in an instant, The butler, Mr. Cameron, panted by the entrance to the library. In his hand, he clutched a folded envelope sealed with red wax. "Madam," he stammered, offering the envelope to Lady Beaumont, "I found this on a side table in the gallery. It was not there moments ago." Lady Beaumont took the envelope with trembling fingers. The crest on the wax bore the Beaumont family insignia, a griffin rampant. She broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. Her face blanched as she read the lines in a bold, unfamiliar hand. "Something is wrong," she whispered, voice quavering. "This letter refers to Lord Beaumont's will, a clause I have never seen. It states that should I attempt to press charges against the murderer, the estate would pass wholly to Dr. Langley's niece, a Miss Harriet Langley." The assembled company murmured in alarm. Sir Arthur's eyes widened. Colonel Harrington started. Miss Kells's hand flew to her throat. Poirot rose calmly. "A missing will." "Then," he said, voice measured, and a new intrigue to draw our attention. He took the letter from Lady Beaumont and examined it under the lamplight. "Note how freshly it is penned. The ink scarcely dry, yet the sealing wax is genuine Beaumont, taken from the display case in the hall." Hastings exchanged a glance with the colonel. "But why forge a will clause now?" he asked. Poirot's small eyes gleamed. "To divert our investigation. Once again, we have been following one thread. The murder of Dr. Langley. Now, the disappearance of an original will, and the appearance of a forged clause, cast suspicion in another direction." He turned to Superintendent Matthews. "Shall we search the gallery and the study for the original will?" "With your permission, Monsieur Poirot," Matthews replied, already moving toward the gallery. Poirot lingered by the fireplace, addressing the guests. "Mesdames et messieurs, it appears the murderer, or an accomplice, seeks to muddy the waters by introducing a secondary misdeed, a counterfeit will, implicating Lady Beaumont. Intended to shift suspicion or to threaten her." He paused. "And we must consider whether this forgery is authored by the same hand that killed Dr. Langley, or by another party with separate motives." Lady Beaumont pressed the letter to her chest. "I have never seen this clause. Why would anyone believe I would allow Dr. Langley's niece to inherit?" "The cynic might suggest that someone close to you benefits directly," Poirot observed. "Dr. Langley's niece. That is an interesting choice. Do any among you have knowledge of this Harriet Langley?" Silence fell. Sir Arthur cleared his throat. "I have no acquaintance with her, nor do I believe Colonel Harrington or Miss Kells has mentioned a niece." The colonel shook his head. "Never heard of her until tonight." Miss Kells's eyes flicked to Hastings. "I only know Dr. Langley had a sister, who died years ago. I assumed no living relatives." Poirot made a note in his notebook. "Then this clause is drawn from a private document, the original will, that only a handful of people have seen. Lord Beaumont. You must have had a copy. Lord Beaumont, summoned from the study by Matthews's subordinate, joined them. He examined the letter with growing concern. "I keep my will in the strong box above my desk, along with other papers. It has not been opened since my late wife's passing." His voice trembled. "If someone accessed it, my God," Poirot nodded, "and the sealing wax from your display, also easily obtained by someone with knowledge of the hall's layout. They combined that with the Parchment's misdirection and the murder. A clever hand indeed." At that moment, a constable entered, followed by Superintendent Matthews with two assistants carrying lanterns. They fanned out, searching the gallery's fine carpets and the arched window sills. Hastings accompanied them, flashlight in hand. Lady Beaumont turned to Poirot, eyes brimming. "Monsieur, my reputation, my entire family's future, is threatened. Can we trust this forgery to be a mere trick?" Poirot laid a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We shall see, madam. The fact that the villain introduces a secondary crime suggests desperation. The real culprit hopes to distract us from the primary act, yet may reveal himself in the process. He turned to the assembled guests. I shall remain here with Lady Beaumont. Superintendent Matthews, please send word when the will is found or declared missing. He gestured to the study door. Hastings will accompany you, as Matthews. And Hastings departed. Poirot guided Lady Beaumont to the chaise longue. He unfolded the letter again. Look at the handwriting. Madam, notice its flourishes, the extended loop on the G, the trailing curl of the Y. Does it remind you of any hand you have seen tonight? Lady Beaumont studied the script. Brow furrowed. It seems formal, but I do not recognize it. Yet it may be an imitation, Poirot said, a forger's attempt to mask their natural penmanship. Let me examine further. He retrieved his magnifying glass and leaned close to the letter, tracing each line dot in the gallery. Matthews and Hastings reported to Sir Arthur Winslow, Colonel Harrington, and Miss Kells. They found the strong box locked, its key still in Lord Beaumont's possession, and no sign of the original will. The great oak desk was undisturbed except for the papers Dr. Langley had examined. The butler confirmed he had not accessed the study. The police assistants bagged all documents for forensics. Back in the drawing room, Poirot stood and pocketed the letter. Our secondary mystery deepens. A forged will, a missing document, and a suspicious clause naming a stranger. This suggests that the murderer has not only a motive against Dr. Langley, but also against the Beaumont estate. Lady Beaumont's face was pale. Who among us would gain most from such a clause? Poirot turned to Colonel Harrington, who had just returned. Colonel, do you know of any heir who stands to benefit by portraying Lady Beaumont as conspirator? The colonel shook his head. None that I know. I and none profit from this deception except the forger, whoever he may be. Sir Arthur and Miss Kells rejoined them. Poirot addressed the group. We must consider two possibilities. The forger is the murderer, creating multiple layers of misdirection, or the forger is a separate villain exploiting the chaos. He steepled his fingers. In either case, the same hand may slip. Let us watch for fingerprints on furniture, ink smudges on fingers, and observe who shows undue interest in Lord Beaumont's papers. He locked eyes with Miss Kells. Mademoiselle, you were closest to Dr. Langley's research materials. Could you have glimpsed details of the will among her notes? Miss Kells's eyes widened. I never saw any mention. She kept correspondence separate. Poirot nodded. Very well. Then we shall watch for another clue. For tonight, our suspects face not only the crime of murder, but also the crime of forgery. And when we unveil both, the true culprit will find himself cornered. He raised his hand. We resume our investigation at dawn. Until then, no papers from the strongbox may be removed, and no guests may enter the study. Good night. As the guests dispersed, each retreated to their chambers under watch. Poirot remained by the fireplace with Hastings. Mon ami, he said quietly, the secondary mystery has sharpened our view. The murderer grows careless, layering distractions at first light. We shall uncover the forger's identity, and by extension, the murderer's. Hastings nodded, closing his notebook. The game grows ever more intricate, Poirot. Indeed, Poirot murmured, gazing into the dying embers, but the little grey cells are equal to the task, for in the end, false leads can only delay justice, never prevent it. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. Morning light filtered through the high windows of the drawing-room as the assembled company reconvened. A hush fell as Poirot entered, accompanied by Superintendent Matthews and Hastings. The air felt heavy with unspoken anxieties, each suspect aware that fresh discoveries had sharpened the investigation's focus. Poirot stood before the group, hands clasped behind his back. Mesdames et messieurs, last night's events, the forged will, the murder, the misdirection were not random acts. They were performed by someone intimately familiar with each of you and with the hidden bonds that link your histories. Today, I present the connections uncovered by our inquiries. He motioned to Hastings, who spread several documents on a small side table. One was a typed memorandum, another, a faded photograph. A third, a sheaf of letters. First, Poirot said, "This memorandum, found in Dr. Langley's study among her personal notes." He held it aloft. "It details an agreement between Dr. Langley and Colonel Harrington, dating back 2 years, a plan to co-author a treatise on medieval ciphers. Yet no such book has been published, Colonel." He nodded to Harrington. The Colonel stiffened. "That accord was abandoned when Florence chose to work solo. I accepted her decision gracefully. Yet you continued to correspond." Poirot persisted, indicating a stack of letters. "Your communication ceased only last month." He picked up a folded letter, reading aloud an excerpt. "You promised recognition. Marcus, I will not be slighted." Harrington's face darkened. Dr. Langley grew increasingly possessive. "Of her discoveries, I withdrew to avoid a quarrel." Poirot folded the letter. "A quarrel so bitter that the final exchange ended with threats. Such resentment can fester into vengeance." He then turned to Sir Arthur Winslow, our second connection. "This photograph, discovered behind a loose panel in the library. It shows you with Dr. Langley at a diplomatic gala in Constantinople 15 years ago." Sir Arthur's jaw tightened. "Your accompaniment of her that evening gave rise to whispers of impropriety." Sir Arthur cleared his throat. "We were friends and colleagues. Nothing more. Those rumors never bore truth." "Indeed," Poirot said. "But Dr. Langley held in her possession letters from you, letters expressing admiration." "Perhaps more." He indicated another letter, dated 2 months prior, whose final line read, "Your brilliance outshines the court's proudest luminaries. I remain yours in esteem. A.W. Sir Arthur paled. "A gallant compliment, hardly a motive for murder." "Compliments can be misread, sir," Poirot replied, "and misreading can breed jealousy, especially in the presence of another woman's success." Miss Kells shifted in her seat as Poirot addressed her. "And now, mademoiselle, your connection. These annotated drafts of your poems, found mixed with Dr. Langley's papers. Evidence suggests Dr. Langley was mentoring you, guiding meter and form. Yet your final draft, published just last month, bears striking similarity to her unpublished verse." Miss Kells's face flushed. She offered guidance freely. "My work blossomed under her tutelage. I would never betray her trust. Tutorship is a generous gift," Poirot agreed. "Yet the line between guidance and appropriation can be easily crossed and resentment can follow. When the pupil surpasses the master," he laid down the drafts. "One poem, in particular, contains a hidden dedication to Florence, a dedication you removed before publication." "Why?" Miss Kells's voice trembled. "I feared perceptions of nepotism. I did not wish to seem indebted. That can rankle, as can perceived favoritism," Poirot observed. "Now, Lady Beaumont, your connection is perhaps most delicate." He picked up an envelope sealed with crimson wax. "This letter, discovered under a loose floorboard in the study, addressed to you from a Miss Harriet Langley. Dr. Langley's the niece named in the forged will." Lady Beaumont's eyes widened. She reached for her gloved hand to steady herself. The letter read in part, "My dearest godmother, I trust that you will honor your promise and provide for me. You know the truth of my parentage. My mother died in childbirth, and you alone offered a home. I await your generosity." Lady Beaumont's composure faltered. "I never. That letter was private. My husband had forgotten its existence. I intended to adopt her, officially, once the will was amended. A noble intention, Poirot said softly, yet also a secret kept from the world. You believed your promise would remain hidden until Dr. Langley threatened its disclosure. He let that hang in the air. Lord Beaumont, summoned by Matthews, joined them now. Poirot addressed him. Your connection to Dr. Langley goes beyond scholarship. You financed her early research, offering both support and silent control over her findings. That patronage can breed a sense of ownership or of obligation. Lord Beaumont swallowed. I sought only to aid her career. Aid comes with strings, Poirot replied, and strings can tighten into bindings of resentment or fear. He stepped back, eyes sweeping the room. Thus we have three triangles of tension: professional rivalry between colonel and scholar, personal admiration between diplomat and scholar, creative indebtedness between poet and scholar, and a familial promise between Madame Beaumont and the niece. Each presents motive, each reveals a hidden bond. Hastings interjected. But these connections, do they point to the murderer or merely to those who might resent Dr. Langley? Poirot smiled thinly. Resentment alone does not kill. But when resentment combines with fear of exposure, of lost status, of broken promises, then action can become violence. He turned to Superintendent Matthews. Record these connections, monsieur. We now know that every suspect had reason to protect themselves from Dr. Langley's revelations. Then, addressing the group, he said, tonight, we confront not only the killer, but the secrets that underpin this crime. Each of you will remain under close guard in your suites. No papers, no artifacts, no drafts may leave your rooms. As the suspects dispersed under guard, Hastings leaned in. Poirot, which connection troubles you most? Poirot's gaze remained fixed on the grouped manuscripts. The forged will's mention of Miss Harriet Langley ties directly to Lady Beaumont's secret promise. That is a more personal betrayal than any scholarly slight. Yet forging a will requires audacity. Who among us would dare such a bold stroke? Hastings considered. Lady Beaumont, to protect herself, or someone else exploiting her vulnerability. Precisely, Poirot murmured. The murderer may be using her secret as leverage, yet may not be the forger himself, and only one suspect stands to gain if both scandal and murder are pinned on Lady Beaumont. But who is that? We must watch tonight, dear Hastings, for in darkness the murderer may slip once more and reveal the final piece of this intricate puzzle. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue. Hush of the evening settled over Beaumont Hall as dinner concluded. In the dining room, the suspects, still under gentle guard, retreated to the drawing room at Poirot's invitation. A single lamp glowed by the fireplace, casting tall shadows against the silk-panelled walls. Superintendent Matthews stood discreetly near the doorway, while Hastings took his customary place beside Poirot. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice soft yet carrying the authority of unshakable confidence, we have discussed motives, unearthed resentments, and revealed hidden connections. Yet the final key to our puzzle remains elusive. I propose to share with you now the single clue that has guided my little grey cell since the first moment of the crime. He reached into his waistcoat and produced a slender, ivory-handled magnifier. Observe this fragment of parchment. With a graceful motion, he placed before them a small scrap bearing a sliver of medieval script torn from the margin during the dome's shattering. Under its faded ink lay 3 faint scratch marks, almost imperceptible. Hastings leaned in, peering through the magnifier. But those are simply stray gouges. No, but not stray, Poirot corrected gently. They correspond exactly to the nib pattern of a quill pen, a signature flourish of one who is accustomed to writing with great precision. Notice the spacing. to fine lines flanking a heavier central groove. He tapped the fragment. Such marks resolved only when our scribe lifts the quill just so, then presses down with deliberate force. Lady Beaumont exchanged a glance with Sir Arthur, who pursed his lips. Colonel Harrington shifted uncomfortably. Miss Kells's eyes widened. Poirot let the moment linger before continuing. Now, Hastings, did you recall the inquiry into the smudged fingertip found on the crystal dome? Hastings nodded. The laboratory reported that the smudge contained residue of sepia ink, precisely the type used by scholars and by our poet here. He turned to Miss Kells. Mademoiselle, would you care to explain how sepia ink came to rest upon your gloves? Miss Kells's face flushed. She rose, voice tremulous. I handled my drafts earlier. Yes, I carried them to the piano for recitation. I touched the dome in passing, merely resting a fingertip to steady myself. Poirot inclined his head, yet when one steadies a trembling hand, one does not press so firmly as to transfer ink. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Only someone with a practiced hand accustomed to precise strokes could leave such a mark. Sir Arthur cleared his throat. But sepia ink is not uncommon among scholars. Dr. Langley herself used it. Indeed, Sir Arthur, Poirot replied. Yet Dr. Langley's gloves bear no sepia. Only yours, Miss Kells, and only your drafts identified by your monogram in the corner have traces matching that residue. He offered Hastings a slight nod, and Hastings produced a folded page from his notebook, his swatch of paper removed, for testing. But why would I? Miss Kells began, then fell silent. Eyes brimming with tears, Poirot continued, ignoring her falter. Now consider the 3 scratch marks on this perished fragment. They align with the quill you employed when editing your final poem found among Dr. Langley's papers. He held the fragment aloft, catching the lamp's glow on the aged fibers. Do you recognize the flourish, Miss Kells? She shook her head, tears spilling. No, but her courage seemed to fail her, and she sank into a chair. Colonel Harrington stepped forward, voice low. You think she cut the parchment, then attempted to frame Colonel for the murder of Dr. Langley. Poirot turned his gaze to the Colonel. The cut occurred when the dome shattered. The tear was incidental, but the scratch marks were pre-existing, etched deliberately before the dome's replacement. They betray an attempt to obscure the true erasure beneath them. He addressed the whole company. Our murderer not only silenced Dr. Langley, but endeavored to obliterate a name, then misdirect us to Colonel Harrington. Yet in doing so, she forgot that her own pen left a secret signature. A murmur spread through the guests. Lady Beaumont rose, hands clasped, voice trembling. So the murderer is Vivian. Miss Kells covered her face. No, I loved Florence. I would never. Poirot inclined his head, voice measured, yet you had motive. The fear that Dr. Langley's implied mentorship would overshadow your own talent. That her shadow would darken your name. You had opportunity. As you were nearest to the parchment, and your gloves bore the ink residue, Miss Kells's shoulders shook. Hastings laid a comforting hand upon her. Vivian, is it so? She looked up, tears staining her cheeks. I only wanted to feel worthy of her praise. I never meant to kill her. Her voice quavered. I only touched the dome to steady myself, then heard the crash. I saw her fall. Poirot held up a gloved palm. Mademoiselle, the evidence contradicts your words. Your fingerprints on the dome, your ink residue and the quills. Scratch marks all point to you. Yet the fatal blow was directed by a slender blade, no traces of metal on your person. At Poirot's words, Superintendent Matthews produced a small velvet pouch from it. He withdrew a slender stiletto, polished and gleaming in the lamp's light, found hidden among Miss Kells's manuscripts. Matthews announced. "It bears traces of blood and sepia ink." A collective gasp rose. Miss Kells went rigid. "No, no, it's not mine." Poirot's gaze was gentle yet unyielding, and yet it was secreted among your things. "The sepia residue on the handle matches that on your gloves." He let his words settle as Miss Kells collapsed into sobs. "But the name on the parchment, Harrington, why?" Colonel Harrington demanded. Poirot turned to the colonel. A desperate misdirection. "You, Colonel, provided the perfect foil. A prior acquaintance, a motive of thwarted collaboration. Our murderer knew suspicion would naturally fall upon you, but she overplayed her hand, forgetting that her own escritura would betray her." Miss Kells looked up through tears. I never meant to set him up. I panicked." Hastings moved to the distraught poet's side. "It's over now. Vivian." Poirot surveyed the assembled company. "Mademoiselle Kels's confession may follow when the authorities question her. But let us not overlook another vital truth. She believed Dr. Langley intended to publish a final paper naming her as protégée, an action that would have forever linked her name to Dr. Langley's fame." Lady Beaumont turned away, sobbing quietly. Colonel Harrington's expression was one of relief tempered with sorrow. Sir Arthur folded his arms, gaze distant. Poirot folded his hands. "Our secret clue, the quill scratch marks, has revealed the murderer's identity. Yet motive and opportunity must be tested by confession." He paused, gaze resting on Miss Kells. "Mademoiselle, when you are ready, I shall ask you to relate every detail," as Matthews moved to secure the stiletto and begin formal rest proceedings. Hastings leaned in to whisper to Poirot. "A masterful trap, sir, but perhaps too gentle." Poirot allowed a small smile. "Gentle, yes, but precise. The little grey cells must always lead the hand gently, lest they break the thread of truth." Outside, a distant owl hooted. Within Beaumont Hall, justice had at last found its voice. Chapter 11. Tensions as the drawing-room air had turned frigid after the disclosure of the sepia residue and Th. A bruising suggestion that one among them had deliberately misled the investigation, as Superintendent Matthews escorted Miss Vivian Kells, her hands clasped in trembling defiance, toward a guarded corner. The remaining guests drifted into uneasy clusters. Hastings, ever vigilant, hovered at Poirot's side, notebook in hand. The detective's expression was inscrutable, but Hastings noted a subtle tension in his tightly pressed lips. Poirot allowed the room to settle before speaking. His voice slow yet carrying throughout the chamber. "Mesdames et messieurs, we have reached a crucial juncture. The evidence points to Mademoiselle Kels's interference with the parchment and the dome. And yet, there remain questions both of motive and of opportunity that require your full candor." Lady Beaumont rose, smoothing her lace cuffs. "Monsieur Poirot, I cannot believe Vivian would go so far as to fabricate evidence and to duel with Dr. Langley's life." Sir Arthur Winslow, perched near the window, folded his arms. "It is indeed a heavy accusation, but I must confess that even my diplomatic skills would falter under such duplicity." Colonel Harrington's jaw was set like steel. "We all have reasons to resent Dr. Langley, but murder and false wills, that is beyond even the most embittered rival." Poirot inclined his head. "Precisely. Which leads us to examine the reactions of those who stand to gain still should Mademoiselle Kels's confession prove incomplete." He turned to Lady Beaumont. "Madam, your secret promise to Harriet Langley remains intact. Should the truth of that adoption come to light, you would face scandal." Lady Beaumont's composure wavered. "I would face social disgrace, yes, but I would never jeopardize a friend's safety." "Yet you remain anxious," Poirot observed. "Your gloved hands tremble when you speak of scandal, as though a deeper fear grips you." She inhaled sharply, then steadied herself. "Fear of scandal is not fear of imprisonment. Poirot allowed her a small measure of sympathy before moving on. Sir Arthur, your letters to Dr. Langley implied more than academic admiration. Should those letters be published, your reputation would suffer irremediably. Sir Arthur adjusted his cufflinks. Such suggestions may tarnish a decorous career, but not enough to drive one to murder. Perhaps, Poirot conceded. Yet, the forensic revelation of sepia ink may yet tie those letters to a wider deception. He paused, then addressed Colonel Harrington. And Colonel, your aborted collaboration with Dr. Langley deprived you of co-authorship and potential acclaim. You admitted to fleeting threats in your final correspondence. Might those veiled resentments now kindle violent action? Colonel Harrington's gaze flickered to Miss Kells's pale figure at the far end of the room. I regret those words, but I never intended more than a sharp retort. I valued her mind even if my pride suffered. Poirot steepled his fingers. Pride can wound just as deeply as envy. Each of you harbored wounds of the heart, whether wounded pride, fear of disgrace, or creative jealousy. In such a charged atmosphere, a single spark can ignite catastrophe. At that moment, Mr. Camden, the butler, entered carrying a tray of brandy and water. He offered cups to Lady Beaumont and Colonel Harrington. Even Sir Arthur accepted a cordial. A hush fell as they sipped, steam rising in the lamplight. Hastings whispered to Poirot. They looked to you for direction, but none dare speak against each other directly. Poirot nodded. Voice barely above a whisper. Allow them to stew. In their suspicions, Hastings, the pressure will force cracks either in confession or in alliances. He rose, addressing the entire circle. I now propose a final test of trust, a question posed in turn. Beneath oath, did you, at any point last evening, handle a bladed instrument apart from your dinner cutlery? A ripple of unease passed through the suspect's, Lady Beaumont's. Eyes widened. Sir Arthur shifted, and Colonel Harrington's knuckles whitened round his tumbler. Miss Kells's breathing hitched. Poirot fixed his gaze on Sir Arthur. Sir Arthur Winslow. Sir Arthur cleared his throat. I did not handle any blade. The only steel I touched was the carving knife for dinner. His voice betrayed a hint of defiance. Poirot turned to Colonel Harrington. Colonel, I had no need to, monsieur. I kept to brandy and conversation. His voice trembled. Lady Beaumont swallowed. I only held the domed cover and my pen for signatures, her fingers wrapped tightly round the cup. Poirot let his eyes linger on Miss Kells. Mademoiselle. Kells, she shook her head. Lips pressed together. No. The only blade I touched was in my writing box, the paper knife miniatures from the Parchment. Poirot inclined his head. Experience has shown the truth often lies at the edge of precision. A paper knife may serve as tool or weapon, depending on intent. He paused, letting the weight of that observation settle. Yet no one has admitted to possessing the stiletto found among manuscripts. Sir Arthur glanced at Miss Kells in alarm. You kept that weapon among your papers. Why? Miss Kells's eyes filled. I found it on the floor after the crash. I intended to return it to the study. I never used it. Colonel Harrington shook his head. A convenient story. Madam, he jerked his head toward Miss Kells. You claim innocence, yet admit possession of the weapon. Lady Beaumont rose abruptly. Enough. We stand here trading accusations like cards, while the real villain stands by, manipulating our fear, sir. Arthur's face crumpled. Madam, calm yourself. We must follow Poirot's lead. Poirot raised his hand. Silence, please. He steepled his fingers once more. Your emotional defenses are laid bare. Now consider this: the forged will, the mutilated parchment, the misdirected footprints, all designs of a single mind. That mind sought to fracture your trust, to exploit your hidden fears, but fractures reveal crevices, weak points through which truth can emerge. He paced slowly before them. I invite each of you to reflect on what you most fear: disgrace, loss of reputation, shattered ambition, or betrayal of trust tomorrow at dawn. We shall reconvene and test those fears against your testimonies for now. Rest and consider whether your secrets serve you or ensnare you. With that, Poirot and Hastings withdrew to the library, leaving the suspects to the dim lamplight. Outside, a distant watchman's bell tolled. Inside, shadows lengthened, and tension thickened the air, an invisible vice tightening round each. Hastings closed the library door behind them. This game of nerves grows perilous, sir. Poirot stood by the window, hands clasped. Yes, Hastings. But it is under pressure that diamonds form or shatter. Tomorrow we shall see which of our suspects proves most fragile. He turned, eyes bright with determination. Until then, the little grey cells must rest only to awaken sharper on the morrow. Chapter 12. The confrontation at the following morning. The drawing-room was ranged for what Poirot termed the final reckoning. Chairs formed a semicircle facing the marble fireplace, and a low table bore the scrap of parchment fragment. The sepia-stained glove, and the crumpled forged will. Superintendent Matthews stood ready to record statements. Hastings lingered at Poirot's side, notebook in hand. The four remaining suspects, Lady Beaumont, Sir Arthur Winslow, Colonel Harrington, and the butler, Mr. Camden, took their seats with varying degrees of apprehension. Poirot surveyed them with his keen grey eyes. Mesdames et messieurs, we have uncovered motives and misdirections aplenty. We have seen how envy, fear, and obligation can drive one to desperate acts. Yet only one among you struck the fatal blow and orchestrated the surrounding deceptions. I intend now to confront that person directly and to watch for the smallest fissure in their defences. He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to settle. Lady Beaumont clasped her gloved hands. Sir Arthur's jaw tightened. Colonel Harrington's posture stiffened. Mr. Camden's gaze flickered to the floor. Let us begin with the forged will. Poirot continued, producing the letter. This was penned only yesterday, in sepia ink identical to that on the dome fragment. It names a Miss Harriet Langley, purported niece of the late Dr. Langley. He held the letter aloft. Dr. Langley never mentioned such a niece to most. Of you yet one suspect had private knowledge, the location of this very letter. All eyes turned to Lady Beaumont, who paled. Poirot let the silence linger before speaking again. Madam, you found this letter under a floorboard in the study. You claimed it must have been secreted by another. Yet only you and one other know. Of the floorboard's loose section, Lady Beaumont's breath caught. I merely remembered its existence from years past. My husband and I used to hide tokens there. Poirot inclined his head. A convenient memory. Yet the moat around that board was recently disturbed. Only one person had both reason and opportunity to access it, unnoticed, our trusted butler. Mr. Camden, the butler, stiffened. Sir, I admit I maintain this state, but I have no reason to forge Lady Beaumont's seal. Precisely, Poirot said calmly, if you acted alone. Why implicate Lady Beaumont? No, our culprit preferred to direct attention elsewhere toward you, Colonel Harrington, toward Miss Kells, toward Sir Arthur. But let us turn now to the scrap of parchment. He placed the fragment before them. These 3 scratch marks, when examined under magnification, correspond exactly to the nib cuts of a scholar's quill. They were deliberately inserted after. The original name was erased. To obscure the real erasure beneath, only one among you had sufficient familiarity with medieval script to mimic such a pattern and used a quill for that purpose. He fixed Colonel Harrington with a steady gaze. Colonel, you admitted to using a paper knife from your writing box, yet you never explained why that paper knife was wiped clean before our examination. Colonel Harrington's cheeks flushed. I cleaned it after trimming my correspondence. It had become dull. Poirot led the statement. A curious detail, Colonel, that your paper knife bears no trace of glass or ink, despite your proximity to the shattering dome. Yet the stiletto found among Miss Kells's manuscripts bears only sepia residue. Consider, the murder wiped her weapon clean, but fit to soil her own writing instrument, so she used the stiletto from the study. At this, Sir Arthur shifted in his seat. Are we to believe the murderer undertook such care with a private dagger, yet manipulated the family seal and doctored a will? Indeed, Poirot replied. A meticulous mind can plan multiple layers of deception. Now, let us recall the forged will's text. He recited the critical clause. Should Lady Beaumont pursue legal action against the murder of Dr. Florence Langley, the estate shall transfer wholly to her niece, Miss Harriet Langley. He paused and then addressed Lady Beaumont directly. Madam, you would gain nothing by pressing charges, for your inheritance is secured regardless. But someone else stands to gain everything by eliminating Dr. Langley and forcing scandal upon you. That person is the one who wrote this clause. Lady Beaumont's eyes widened in dawning horror. No, that cannot be. Poirot turned his attention to Sir Arthur Winslow. Sir Arthur, you have no connection to Miss Harriet Langley, yet the writer of this clause knew exactly which name would wound Lady Beaumont most deeply. Only one suspect had access to the Beaumont family's private correspondences and also intimate knowledge of Dr. Langley's unpublished letters. Sir Arthur's composure cracked. I received one letter from Harriet. Many years ago, she wrote to me seeking aid, addressing me as uncle. I never told anyone. A murmur rippled through the group. Colonel Harrington's eyes narrowed. Mr. Camden's mouth dropped slightly. Poirot nodded. Aha, that is the crucial misstep. So Arthur, you knew of Harriet Langley, her connection to Dr. Langley, and her potential claim on the estate. You alone possessed the knowledge to forge this clause convincingly, and you alone would benefit from Lady Beaumont's disgrace. Your own reputation as a diplomat would remain untainted, while yours alone gained control of charitable bequests. Tied to Dr. Langley's legacy, Sir Arthur rose, face ashen. But I never intended to kill her, so you say. Poirot replied. Yet murder and forgery both flow from the same motive, the desire to reshape fate. You manipulated the parchment's margin to point toward Colonel Harrington. Then you replaced the dome and struck the fatal blow, eliminating Dr. Langley before she could publish her final deduction. The colonel sprang to his feet. This is preposterous. Poirot held up a gloved hand. Consider the sequence. The dome is shattered. The murderer uses the stiletto to pierce Dr. Langley's heart, then recollects her quill-like scratch marks to conceal the real evidence. Finally, she forges a will to redirect legal consequences. Only one person among us had the connections, a diplomat with ties to both the Beaumont seal and Dr. Langley's F. Amelie Sir Arthur Winslow. Sir Arthur sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. It was never meant to become so entangled. I only sought to protect my own standing. But when Dr. Langley discovered my involvement with Harriet, she threatened to expose me. I panicked. Poirot nodded gravely. And in that panic, you committed murder to silence her and framed another to divert suspicion. He addressed Superintendent Matthews. Monsieur, you will take Sir Arthur Winslow into custody. As Matthews moved forward, Sir Arthur rose. In a daze, Lady Beaumont covered her mouth in horror. Colonel Harrington exhaled sharply. Mr. Camden stood rigid. Hastings closed his notebook, another life undone by panic and preservation of pride. Poirot's gaze softened slightly. Sadly, our human frailties often lead us to deeds more monstrous than the motives justify. But now, justice may proceed. He turned to the stunned assembly. The confrontation is complete. May truth and fairness follow in its wake? Outside, a distant carriage rolled over gravel. Within Beaumont Hall, the final threads of deception lay severed, revealed by a masterful confrontation of motive, method, and opportunity. The little grey cells had triumphed once more. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape the hush that followed Sir Arthur Winslow's arrest dissolved almost immediately into frantic activity. Superintendent Matthews barked orders to the constables, instructing them to escort the disgraced diplomat to a secure room. Lady Beaumont trembled in a corner, supported by Colonel Harrington, while Mr. Camden hurried about, gathering misplaced documents. Hastings hovered beside Poirot, whose calm veneer showed only the faintest tension behind his brows. Poirot observed, "The flurry of movement. There is one more hazard." "Hastings," he murmured, "a culprit cornered may lash out or flee. We must remain vigilant." No sooner had he spoken than a sudden crash echoed from the gallery. Glass shattered, and a piercing cry rang out. The guests turned in alarm as a footman sprinted into the drawing-room, his powdered wig askew. "Monsieur Poirot." "Sir Arthur, he's escaped." The youth gasped. He broke free from the constable and dashed through the French doors. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Quick, Hastings, let us pursue." He strode toward the exit, came tapping sharply on the marble floor. Hastings followed, heart pounding. They found the gallery in disarray. A tall display cabinet lay on its side, its contents rare manuscripts and illuminated scrolls strewn across the floor. The smashed remnants of a lantern guttered on a side table, and the French windows stood wide, letting in a chill wind from the garden path below. "Through here," shouted a constable, pointing toward the moonlit terrace. Sir Arthur's silhouette vanished into the shadow of the yew hedge. Poirot brushed past, Hastings close behind. After him, the detective called, and they burst into the dew-slicked night dot beyond the hedge. The gravel path wound toward the tool shed and the sunken fountain where the matching glove had been found. Lantern light flickered as constables fanned out, shouting Sir Arthur's name. Hastings stumbled on the damp gravel, but Poirot maintained his balance, scanning the darkness. "There!" cried the same constable, spotting a figure in the distance near the old gardener's hut. Sir Arthur's silhouette slumped against the door, as though searching for an egress. Poirot increased his pace. "Sir Arthur Winslow," he called. "There is no escape, I assure you." He noted the man's dishevelled coat, the torn sleeve, and the faint smear of sepia ink on his cuff. Sir Arthur whirled, face pale and eyes wild. In his hand shone a slender dagger, the very stiletto used to kill Dr. Langley. He held it aloft as if preparing to thrust at any pursuer. "Halt, sir," Hastings shouted, drawing closer. "Drop the weapon." Sir Arthur's lip trembled. "It was not meant to end this way," he cried. "I was desperate, my career ruined, my secrets on the brink of exposure." Poirot appeared at his side, calm and resolute. "Indeed, desperation drives men to extremes, but violence only compounds guilt." He spoke quietly, locking eyes with the desperate man. "You have nowhere to go, sir. Lay down the weapon, and no further blood need stain this night." Sir Arthur wavered, then lunged forward. The constables closed in, grappling for the stiletto's hilt. Hastings leaped to restrain him, twisting the man's wrist until the blade clattered to the ground. Sir Arthur sagged, tears mingling with perspiration. "I only wanted to silence her," he sobbed. "She threatened to publish letters that would ruin me and expose Harriet to disgrace." Poirot knelt and retrieved the stiletto, examining the blade's tip. "That you wielded. This again shows your intent to kill a second time, to ensure your secret remained buried." He stood, addressing the constables. "Escort Sir Arthur back inside and fasten him securely. He must face justice without further tragedy." As the officers led the broken man away, Poirot turned to Hastings. "Our desperate attempt was thwarted. Hastings, yet consider how a culprit's final gambit often reveals the depth of his guilt. Hastings nodded, brushing mud from his coat, and his fear that even the law would not spare him. They retraced their steps to the gallery, where the manuscripts lay scattered. Mr. Camden knelt among them, assessing the damage. "Terrible waste, sir," the butler murmured, voice tight. "The display ruined priceless documents lost," Poirot placed a gentle hand on the man's shoulder. "Regrettable, Monsieur Camden, but justice demands such tumult. Let us restore order and preserve what remains." He glanced up as Lady Beaumont and Colonel Harrington emerged onto the terrace, faces drawn with concern. "Madam," Poirot said, inclining his head in greeting, "Sir Arthur has been secured." Lady Beaumont exhaled in relief. "Thank heaven. I feared he would harm us all." "Your fears were not unfounded," Poirot replied, "for guilt can drive a man to reckless violence. But the law has its due course." Colonel Harrington approached, expression a mixture of sympathy and weariness. "I am glad this night is nearly at its end." "It is indeed," Poirot agreed. "Yet one final gathering remains when we bring together all evidence and watch the end unfold." He turned back to the interior. "Come, Hastings, let us return before the others grow anxious. Inside." The drawing-room glowed with the steady firelight. The guests had been reassembled, Lady Beaumont seated, Mr. Camden standing by her side, and Colonel Harrington leaning on the piano. Superintendent Matthews addressed them, voice firm. "Mesdames et messieurs, we regret the disturbance. Sir Arthur Winslow has been returned to secure custody. No further attempts at escape or violence will be permitted." Poirot stepped forward. "And now," he announced, "we approach the culmination of our inquiry. In 1 hour's time, we shall convene at the hearth to review the final facts, no diversions, no misdirections, only the truth laid bare." A murmur of assent rippled through the assembled company. Hastings caught Poirot's eye and offered a small nod. Outside, the first pale light of dawn began to chase away the night's shadows. Inside Beaumont Hall, the suspects braced themselves for the ultimate revelation and for the justice that would finally bring their ordeal to a close. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. An hour had passed since Sir Arthur Winslow's desperate flight and recapture. The flaring embers in the hearth had cooled to glowing coals, and the morning light filtered softly through the heavy drapes of the drawing-room. Poirot stood before the assembly, Lady Beaumont on a settee, Colonel Harrington by the piano, Mr. Camden at the doorway, and Superintendent Matthews poised with notebook in hand. Hastings lingered beside Poirot, pen ready to capture the final observations. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, voice measured, "we have traversed a winding path of deception, a shattered dome. A murdered scholar, forged documents, misdirected clues, Hercule's secret signature, and a flash of desperation in the garden. At last, all the pieces have fallen into place." He motioned to the low table behind him, where the key exhibits lay, the fragment of parchment, the sepia-stained glove, the forged will, the paper knife, and the stiletto. Permit me to summarize the sequence, that we may see how each act of the murderer fit together like interlocking gears. He picked up the crystal fragment. First, the dome was struck from within, to create the illusion of an accidental breakage. The murderer then used the stiletto hidden earlier among the manuscripts to deliver the fatal thrust to Dr. Langley, ensuring no pain cry could be heard above the crash. Poirot held the stiletto aloft, its blade gleaming. This deliberate choice of weapon avoided leaving metal residue on her gloves, but transferred sepia ink from her manuscript, handling evidence found on the dome itself. He replaced the dagger and picked up the glove. Next, the murderer dropped one glove in apparent haste, intending to claim that the assailant was Colonel Harrington, whose footprints already led into the yew hedge. But she preserved the mate. to frame him further through its later discovery. Near the fountain, Poirot laid the glove down gently. Then, with scholarly precision, she erased the true name in the margin of the parchment and substituted crude scratch marks resembling the quills. Neb patterned to obfuscate the real erasure beneath, yet those scratches aligned only with the murderer's practiced hand, as revealed by the laboratory's comparison with her editing strokes. He tapped the forged will. Not satisfied with one diversion, she then wrote this counterfeit clause naming Miss Harriet Langley in sepia ink taken from Lady Beaumont's private supplies. The use of the Beaumont sealing wax and knowledge of the hidden floorboard allowed her to deposit the letter where only Lady Beaumont or a trusted servant might find it. Poirot paused. Facing Lady Beaumont, "My dear madam, you believed this, would coerce you into silence, ensuring that your charges would never see courtroom light. But the clause served not your purpose alone. It further diverted attention from the primary crime by layering yet another misdirection." He turned to Colonel Harrington, "And you, Colonel, were meant to bear the bulk of the blame. Your name left in the margin, your association with Dr. Langley's unpublished work, a convenient motive for professional animus." Poirot's gaze drifted across the room. All these elements were calculated, yet one final piece was missing until this morning. He glanced at Hastings, who nodded and handed him a small, sealed envelope. Poirot broke the seal and withdrew. A single sheet of paper, yellowed with age. "This," he announced, "is the original receipt for Dr. Langley's parchment, signed by none other than Sir Arthur Winslow on behalf of the British Museum 40 years ago. It lay hidden within the pages of the catalogue, a document known only to Sir Arthur, the museum's archivist, and Dr. Langley herself. He held the receipt for all to see. This receipt established the chain of custody for the parchment, proving its authenticity and value. Sir Arthur, you believed that by eliminating Dr. Langley, you could prevent publication of her final paper and thus the disclosure of this receipt, which implicated you in the museum's questionable acquisition practices." Sir Arthur's shoulders slumped. Lady Beaumont gasped softly. Colonel Harrington's expression tightened. Mr. Camden's eyes widened. Poirot replaced the parchment receipt on the table. "Thus, the motive twists back to you. Sir Arthur, you coveted your reputation more than any prize, fearing a scandal that would tarnish both your scholarly standing and your diplomatic honors." He straightened and addressed the entire company. Each misdirection served to conceal this underlying goal. But the ultimate proof, this receipt remained concealed until the dust of deception settled. He paused for effect. "It is the final piece that completes our mosaic of truth." Superintendent Matthews stepped forward. "I find the evidence irrefutable." He closed his notebook. "Sir Arthur Winslow, you are charged with the murder of Dr. Florence Langley, with forgery of legal documents, and with multiple acts of obstruction. You will face trial accordingly." Sir Arthur rose, eyes downcast. "I accept my fate." His voice was hollow, but dignified to the last. Lady Beaumont let out a breath she had not realized she held. Colonel Harrington exhaled sharply. Mr. Camden bent to retrieve the fallen manuscripts scattered from the earlier scuffle. Poirot offered a curt nod. "Msemas, at last the circle is complete. The little grey cells have seen every nuance, and justice may now take its course." He turned to Hastings. "Shall we inform the household staff to prepare for the police escort?" Hastings closed his notebook with a single tap. "Very good, sir." He looked to the assembled company. "The storm has passed, and now the calm of resolution awaits." Outside, the distant rumble of carriages approached. Within Beaumont Hall, the final piece had indeed fallen into place, and the long shadow of suspicion gave way to the clear light of truth. Chapter 15. The final gathering, an air of solemn expectancy settled over Beaumont Hall that evening as the household assembled once more in the drawing-room. The fire burned low in the hearth. its embers casting flickering shadows. Across the walnut paneling, outside, a chill wind whistled through the ancient oaks, reminding all that night deepened beyond the windows. Superintendent Matthew stood near the French doors, notebook in hand, while Hastings took his place beside Poirot, ever alert in guest. Chairs were seated Lady Beaumont, her composure renewed, but her eyes guarded Colonel Harrington, whose relief at vindication was tempered by recent revelations, and Mr. Camden, the butler, who carried the weight of seeing his master's home become the stage for a crime. The gallery doors remained closed, preserving the room's integrity and solemnity. Poirot surveyed the company with a composed gravity. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, voice gentle yet commanding attention. "We have traversed treacherous paths of deceit and misdirection. We have seen how a shattered dome concealed a murder, how a stiletto masqueraded as a scholarly instrument, how sepia ink and forged wills twisted suspicion like vines round innocent throats." He paused, allowing the tension to coalesce. "Tonight, I bring us together to reconstruct the precise sequence of events, that each of you may hear the story in its unadorned truth before we proceed to its final conclusion." He motioned to a small writing table upon which lay the key exhibits in neat order, the crystal shard, the sepia-stained glove, the torn parchment fragment, the quill scratch marks, the forged will, and the slender stiletto. Each item was placed, with care, ribbons marking its significance. "Let us begin at the moment when Dr. Langley lifted the dome," Poirot continued. She was eager to examine the marginal cipher, unaware that the dome's bolt had been loosened beforehand. At that critical instant, the killer struck the dome from within, intending, perhaps, to cause alarm rather than harm. Yet in the stunned reaction, Dr. Langley was vulnerable. He picked up the crystal shard. The victim was stabbed swiftly, with a stiletto, hidden among her manuscripts prior to the gathering. The absence of metal residue on her gloves confirms the use of this implement. Turning it over in his gloved hands, he let the group observe its beveled edge. This shard fell as a testament to the violence enacted. Poirot laid down the shard and lifted the sepia-stained glove. In the chaos, one glove was dropped. Its mate was secreted later by the fountain, both placed to suggest Colonel Harrington's guilt, given his boot's path through the yew hedge. Yet the ink on the dropped glove betrays that it belonged to the true assailant. His gaze moved to Colonel Harrington, who nodded subtly. Poirot replaced the glove and unfolded the torn parchment fragment. Next, the cipher's true erasure was concealed beneath deliberate scratch marks mimicking a quill's nib. Only a practiced hand, accustomed to medieval script, could execute such a disguise. That practice, as confirmed by the laboratory, matched the murderer's known editing strokes. He set the fragment aside and retrieved the forged will. As if these diversions were insufficient, a counterfeit clause was penned, naming a niece of the victim in the Beaumont will. The use of genuine Beaumont sealing wax and knowledge of a hidden floorboard allowed the forger to plant this letter for Lady Beaumont's discovery, thus threatening scandal and distracting us further. Lady Beaumont's gloved hands tightened round her armrest as she listened. Head bowed, Poirot continued without pause. Each layer of deception pointed elsewhere, toward academia, toward long-ago acquaintances, toward creative rivalry, yet the true culprit relied on all these threads being followed. He then held aloft the stiletto, its handle gleaming in the firelight. But most telling of all was the stiletto itself, smudged with sepia ink and wiped of other traces. It was drawn from the study's dagger collection just prior to the gathering. Its discovery among the manuscripts provided the final physical link, but not until we recognized its singular significance. Poirot set the dagger down and faced his audience. Thus, the full sequence: the dome struck, the scholar felled, the glove dropped, the name erased, the will forged, the weapon concealed or orchestrated with meticulous care. Yet in the assailant's confidence, a crucial signature was left, the quill scratch marks and the sepia residue. He let his eyes rest on each face in turn. This, Samus, is the true narrative of murder and misdirection at Beaumont Hall. Now, before we declare our final conclusions, I invite your reflections, your observations. If any detail remains unsettled, Colonel Harrington spoke first, voice measured but earnest. Your reconstruction aligns with every clue, Monsieur. Poirot, I am grateful to have been cleared, but I find it difficult to reconcile the care with which the murderer wove these deceptions. Lady Beaumont rose, voice trembling yet clear. To hear it spoken without the fear of accusation restored some peace. Yet I tremble at the thought that such cunning existed among us. Double quotes. Mr. Camden cleared his throat softly. I have maintained this house for decades. Never did I imagine such darkness lurking in its corridors. Your summary brings painful clarity. Sir, Poirot inclined his head. Painful indeed. But clarity is our goal. In one short moment. A lifetime of reputation and trust was shattered yet. In that same moment, truth was set in motion. He turned to Hastings. My dear Hastings, do you find any lacune, any gap in this account that needs filling before we proceed to our grand reveal? Hastings consulted his notes, not a single one. Sir, every action, motive, and misdirection aligns. The narrative is complete. Poirot offered a satisfied nod. He then addressed Superintendent Matthews. The final step is upon us, Monsieur. We shall now name the culprit and expose the fatal flaw in their design, cementing justice hand. Bringing this dark chapter to its close, as Matthews closed his notebook, the assembled company shared a moment's breathless silence. The stage was set for the ultimate disclosure when the last mask would fall and the murderer's identity would be proclaimed for all to hear. Outside, the clock struck 11, its chimes echoing through the hall. Within, the gathered few steeled themselves for the grand reveal that would follow, knowing that at last the truth, in all its precise detail, would be laid bare. Chapter 16. The revealed grand portrait of Lord Beaumont's ancestor loomed above the mantel as Poirot stood before the assembled company, each face etched with anticipation. The hour was late, yet none flagged beneath the detective's steady gaze. Superintendent Matthews and Hastings flanked him, ready to record the final statements. Lady Beaumont sat poised but pale. Colonel Harrington watched intently, and even Mr. Camden's usual reserve had given way to strained curiosity. Poirot cleared his throat gently, his tiny grey cells having devoured every moment of this culmination. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, voice soft yet carrying, we have now heard every soul in this room describe the tangled web of misdirection spun on the night of the murder. We have followed its strands from the shattered dome to the sepia-stained glove, to the forged will, and learned how each was woven by a single mind. He paused, letting the silence breathe. Then, lifting a gloved finger, he continued, yet a murder depends upon one final factor, the assumption that no one will pierce the intricate facade and strike at the heart of the deception. Tonight, I shall name that person, Lady Beaumont's. Breath caught. Colonel Harrington leaned forward. Mr. Camden's posture stiffened. Hastings's pen hovered over his notebook. First, Poirot said, let us consider motive in its purest form. Sir Arthur Winslow, though absent, held a lifelong passion for both diplomacy and antiquities. His reputation in both fields was sterling. Yet when Dr. Langley prepared to publish her last paper, it threatened two things: a disclosure of Sir Arthur's questionable acquisition of the Beaumont Parchment 2 decades ago, and a revelation of his private correspondence with Harriet Langley, which would expose a familiar liaison he wished to keep hidden. He paused, allowing that accusation to resonate beyond the absent diplomat. Second, opportunity. As the British Museum's archivist, Sir Arthur had unsupervised access to the Parchment's provenance files, enough knowledge to replicate medieval scripts and to manipulate the ciphers erasure. He also had free movement in the study, where the stiletto was kept, and familiarity with the floorboard concealing the Beaumont sealing wax. Hastings's notebook recorded every word as Poirot continued. Third, method. The blade used was the museum dagger, slender, precise, and known only to a curator. The quill-like scratch marks in the margin mimic Sir Arthur's own editing flourish, confirmed by forensic analysis of his personal correspondence. The sepia ink on the dome and glove matches the brand he preferred in his diplomatic dispatches. Poirot let the assembled guests absorb these revelations before delivering the coup de grace. Finally, misdirection. The forged will and the planted glove were crafted to implicate Lady Beaumont and Colonel Harrington, both conveniently distanced from the study's inner sanctum, yet in orchestrating these illusions. The murderer overlooked one critical detail: the receipt of acquisition, discovered this morning, which Sir Arthur signed in his capacity as curator. That receipt fell into Dr. Langley's hands, threatening to unmask him. He turned slowly to face the empty space where Sir Arthur had been held under guard earlier. Thus, it was Sir Arthur Winslow who struck the fatal blow, then shattered the dome to muffle the victim's cry, who erased and reinscribed the cipher's margin, who forged the will to divert attention, and who planned his own alibi among the use until this morning's unveiling of the acquisition receipt rendered his position untenable. At that moment, the double doors to the gallery swung open, and two constables entered, escorting Sir Arthur Winslow, head bowed, wrists in gentle restraint. His face was drawn, heart dignified, understanding that the detective's revelation was the wind in his sails of defeat. Poirot inclined his head. Sir Arthur, the evidence against you is incontrovertible. You may speak, if you wish, before Superintendent Matthews records your formal confession. Sir Arthur halted in the center of the room and lifted his eyes to each witness. I will not contest your findings, Monsieur Poirot, he said, voice low but firm. I acted in haste and terror, fear that my career and legacy would lie in tatters. I believed that by silencing Dr. Langley, I could bury the past and protect my reputation. But guilt is a heavier burden than any scandal. His gaze fell upon Lady Beaumont. My deepest regret is the suffering I have caused you. Had I the strength to confess sooner, perhaps we might have spared all this tragedy. Lady Beaumont's gloved hand flew to her mouth. Colonel Harrington's stern features softened with sympathy. Even Mr. Camden's stoic expression betrayed sorrow. Superintendent Matthews stepped forward, pen in hand. Sir Arthur Winslow, you confess to the murder of Dr. Florence Langley, to the forgery of legal documents, and to the obstruction of justice by planting false evidence. Your statement will be recorded and forwarded to His Majesty's courts. Sir Arthur nodded, closing his eyes briefly. I accept whatever sentence the law decrees. I only ask that my actions be understood in context of desperate fear, not malice. Poirot offered a curt nod of acceptance. Your confession is noted. Mesdames et messieurs, our journey through deceit and revelation ends here. May justice proceed, and may we all find solace in the clarity of truth. He turned to Hastings. Mon ami, that concludes our work. You may inform the household and await the arrival of the authorities to transport Sir Arthur to London. Hastings closed his notebook with a decisive click. Very good, sir. He glanced at the shocked faces of the remaining company. It is done. As the servants moved quietly to prepare for the morning's departures, Poirot allowed himself a small smile. The little Gracels, ever vigilant, had cut through the layers of deceit to reveal the murderer's identity. Though sorrow shaded the triumph, justice had been served at Beaumont Hall. And so, in the flickering firelight and under the watchful gaze of ancestral portraits. The final chapter of this intricate mystery drew to a close its truth as precise, and unerring as Poirot's own exquisite deductions. Chapter 17, Outcome, and just as dawn fog lay light upon the gardens of Beaumont Hall as morning carriages rolled up the gravel drive, their wheels crunching in the silence of early hour. Inside the grand drawing-room, now restored to order, Lady Beaumont, Colonel Harrington, and Mr. Camden gathered their belongings under the careful guidance of Superintendent Matthews. Hastings moved discreetly among them, offering reassuring words while gathering personal effects. Meanwhile, Poirot stood by the hearth, cane in hand, his gaze drifting to the glowing embers as he contemplated the final act of this intricate drama. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, drawing their attention with gentle authority. "Last evening's revelations have set in motion the wheels of justice. Sir Arthur Winslow is en route to London, where he will face trial at the Old Bailey for the murder of Dr. Florence Langley, the forgery of legal documents, and obstruction of justice. Let us now consider the outcomes that justice demands both for the guilty and for those wronged." He paused, letting the gravity of his words settle. Colonel Harrington spoke first, stepping forward with a measured nod. "Monsieur Poirot, I am grateful not only for my own exoneration, but for the care you took to shield Lady Beaumont and me from further suspicion. The ordeal has left scars, but your skill has prevented one greater than the tragedy of loss." Poirot inclined his head. "Colonel, your cooperation and candor were instrumental in the end. Justice is not only about punishment, but also about restoration of honor." He turned to Lady Beaumont, who gently smoothed the lace of her sleeves. "Lady Beaumont," Poirot continued, "though you were ensnared by a desperate scheme, you bear no fault. Your secret promise to Harriet Langley spoke of compassion, not malice. I trust that, in time, your reputation will recover, and perhaps your kindness to Miss Langley can yet be honored." His eyes were kind. "Justice may restore your name, but your own integrity has never faltered." Lady Beaumont's voice trembled as she spoke. "I owe you a debt, Monsieur Poirot. You have saved not only my family's honor, but also spared me a lifetime of regret." She offered a grateful smile, eyes glistening. Dotmer Camden stepped forward, bowing his head. "I have served the Beaumonts for many years," he said quietly, "and never did I imagine our home would become a scene of such darkness. Yet your guidance has restored peace. I shall ensure that the Hall's history reflects both the tragedy and the triumph of truth." Poirot nodded approvingly. "Thank you, Monsieur Camden. The measure of justice is also in the preservation of dignity after wrongs have been righted." He then addressed Superintendent Matthews. "Superintendent, your diligence and fairness have upheld the rule of law. Justice must be both swift and meticulous qualities you have demonstrated admirably." Matthews inclined his head. "I shall convey the full report to Scotland Yard. Sir Arthur's trial will follow soon, and the evidence should ensure a just verdict." His tone was firm yet respectful. "I thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for your invaluable assistance." Hastings, who had been cataloguing the remaining exhibits for legal transfer, closed his notebook. "Everything is in order, Superintendent. The chain of custody is unbroken." Poirot allowed himself a small smile. "Excellence in procedure ensures that justice is neither delayed nor denied." He turned once more to the heart of the room. "Mzamas, the final measure of justice is not only the punishment of the guilty, but also the healing of those affected. In that spirit, allow me to share with you the closing act of Dr. Langley's legacy." From his coat pocket, Poirot produced a sealed envelope. Dr. Langley's last manuscript, intended for public dissemination. He placed it carefully on the table. "This document was entrusted to my care before her death. Dr. Langley hoped that her final cipher analysis would shed new light on medieval penitential practices. I believe she would wish it to see the light of day. Lady Beaumont stepped forward and lightly touched the envelope. Then let us honor her wishes. She turned to Colonel Harrington. Shall we ensure this is published under her name? With full acknowledgment. Colonel Harrington bowed his head. With pleasure. Madam, Dr. Langley's work deserves to stand on its demerits, and tainted by scandal. Mr. Camden offered a small nod. I will arrange for a secure courier to deliver this to the museum. As Dr. Langley intended, Poirot placed a hand on the shoulder of each in turn. Then, my friends, we close this dark chapter by fulfilling the scholar's final request, turning tragedy into enduring knowledge. As they stood in silent accord, the first rays of sunlight pierced the tall windows, illuminating the restored harmony of the drawing-room. The carriage bells rang, and outside, the morning bustle resumed: the gardener's whistle, the footman's footsteps, and the call of distant birds. Poirot straightened his cravat and addressed the group one final time. My journey here must now draw to a close. I shall depart shortly, trusting that justice, in its fullest sense, has been served, the murderer convicted, the innocent exonerated, and the scholar's voice preserved for posterity. Lady Beaumont stepped forward to bid him farewell. Monsieur Poirot, I cannot thank you enough. Without you, our world here would have been irreparably altered. Poirot offered a courteous bow. It is my honor. Madam, may peace and scholarship reign in this hall once more. He turned to Hastings. Mon ami, shall we be off? Hastings smiled, gathering his notebook and cane. Yes, sir. There is a train to catch. As the detective and his companion departed Beaumont Hall, the grounds lay bathed in golden light. The weight of yesterday's horrors had given way to the promise of redemption and renewal, and though the affair would linger in local memory, the true measure of justice swift, balanced, and merciful had prevailed, fulfilling Dr. Langley's final hope and restoring harmony to all whose lives she had touched. Chapter 18. The closing remark. Dawn light that filtered through the stained glass transom now flooded the drawing-room eye, in warm gold, lending an almost reverent air to the final gathering. All that remained were Lady Beaumont, Colonel Harrington, and Mr. Camden, seated near the hearth alongside Superintendent Matthews and Hastings. The battered evidence table had been cleared away, save for Dr. Langley's last manuscript, now carefully ruled and tied with ribbon. In the center stood Hercule Poirot, ever poised, his little grey cells having seen the entire tapestry of deceit and restoration. Poirot swept his gaze across the room, letting each weary yet relieved face register in his memory. Samus, he began, voice measured and gentle. We have arrived at the end of our journey together. The murderer has been apprehended, the innocent exonerated, and the scholar's voice preserved. It remains only for us to reflect on the human lessons that lie beneath this case. He paused, letting the soft crackle of the embers underscore his words. Lady Beaumont folded her hands, Colonel Harrington unmoved, and Mr. Camden's countenance softened in gratitude. Hastings leaned forward, pen in hand, prepared to capture Poirot's closing reflections. First, Poirot said, we have seen how the little grey cells our capacity for observation and reason can penetrate the most elaborate webs of deceit. Yet reasoning alone is insufficient without empathy. We must also feel the weight of motive, the fear that drives one to desperate acts. He looked kindly at Lady Beaumont. Your compassion for Miss Harriet Langley, hidden though it was, speaks to the best of human nature. It reminds us that kindness, even when kept private, can serve as an antidote to selfish ambition. Lady Beaumont offered a small, grateful nod. Colonel Harrington studied the manuscript on the table, as though contemplating new purpose. Poirot continued, second, We saw how envy and pride can whisper lethal suggestions to the heart. Sir Arthur Winslow, once a respected diplomat and scholar, fell prey to the fear of disgrace and took the most tragic of steps to protect his name. His downfall teaches us that reputation so fragile and transient should never eclipse the value of integrity. Hastings scribbled hastily in his notebook, glancing up at Poirot's expression of quiet resolve. "Third," Poirot said, addressing Colonel Harrington, "we witnessed that professional rivals may yet find common respect when adversity tests their character. Your own dignified comportment and willingness to assist in bringing the truth to light demonstrate that honor can outshine resentment." Colonel Harrington inclined his head, his eyes reflecting newfound determination. "I intend to complete Dr. Langley's planned collaboration in her memory," he said quietly. "Her insights deserve to be shared." Poirot's small smile widened. "A splendid resolution, Colonel, in that we honor the scholar whose life was cut short." He then turned to Mr. Camden. "And you, Monsieur Camden, maintained your duty even when the world you served was rocked by tragedy. Your steadiness ensured that Beaumont Hall remained a place of order amid chaos, a testament to loyalty's enduring value." The butler bowed, eyes glistening. "I shall see to it that the household restores both its routines and its respect for the late Dr. Langley's memory." Poirot drew a final breath and raised his cane slightly. "Lastly, to my faithful companion, Hastings, you have chronicled each step, each nuance, and you shall carry forth this tale as both cautionary chronicle and tribute to human complexity." He tapped Hastings's notebook. "May readers learn not only of method and deduction, but also of the choices that define us, choices of courage, of compassion, and sometimes of courage found too late." Hastings offered a respectful bow. "I shall endeavor to do justice to the story, sir." Poirot's gaze drifted to the manuscript. "Now, the scholar's final words will at last reach their audience, her analyses illuminating questions long as illant in that her voice transcends the violence done to her, and her legacy endures." He stepped forward to retrieve the manuscript, presenting it reverently to Lady Beaumont. "Madam, with your permission, this shall be delivered to the British Museum and published under Dr. Langley's name with Colonel Harrington as co-editor, in recognition of your patronage." Lady Beaumont accepted the manuscript with both hands. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot, let it be so." Poirot then turned to Superintendent Matthews. "You will oversee the legal transfer and ensure that Sir Arthur Winslow's trial acknowledges the full weight of evidence and motive. Justice must be both firm and fair." Matthews nodded crisply. "It will be so, Monsieur Poirot." With the formalities attended to, Poirot allowed himself a moment's repose by the hearth. The crackling fire seemed to whisper its approval, as though even the room itself rejoiced in the balance restored. "Msamus," Poirot concluded, stepping back and inclining his head in farewell, "this case is now closed. We part with heavy hearts for the tragedy that unfolded, yet with hope for the future that Dr. Langley's work and the lessons it imparts will guide us forward. May we remember that every human heart contains seeds of both light and shadow, and that only through compassion and reason can we cultivate the light within." He offered each of them a final gentle bow. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, filling the hall with brightness that dispelled the shadows of the night's dark events. And in that light, the guests of Beaumont Hall found solace not in forgetting the tragedy, but in embracing the truths revealed and in carrying forward the legacy of both justice and humanity that Dr. Florence Langley embodied.